Is that the meeting starting? So
Yeah, that's the meeting starting, yeah. Apologies for the delay.
thanks, Leader. I've been asked to sort of run through exactly what the proposal from the administration is and give some assurances. So just to take each point in turn as they are in the recommendations. So 2.2, obviously we've considered that today. 2.3, note the concurrent improvements which we've outlined, and obviously the further inquiry work being undertaken. I think that actually this should be subject of a report to full council just to get further details on that appendix 2, and so I think further clarification, particularly on the involvement of internal departments and of external bodies. 2.4 is to agree that a review should be carried out by the Finance Procurement Transformation Committee on our internal financial procedures and procurement standing orders to ensure we have a much stronger assurances that these are complied with, effective to reflect today's operating environment, and agree the scope of this review should be reported to full council in July 2020, and further agree the review recommendations will be reported to full council by December 2020. I think it's fair to say that all elected members are agreed that there should be a review. I know that there are some concerns around the wording. What we'd ask is that elected members go with that recommendation today, and we can make sure that the scope of the review that is reported to July full council is supported, and that any concerns are addressed within the scope that is presented to full council in July 2020. I know that there are calls for a procurement subcommittee. At this moment in time, I'm not sold that we need a procurement subcommittee, but I'm more than happy for the FPT committee to consider that and set up a procurement subcommittee if the committee does decide to. And of course, we could explore the need for a procurement subcommittee within the review that is carried out by the FPT committee. 2.5 is to agree that a route and branch review is carried out into the road service. Agree the scope of this review should be reported to full council in July 2020, and further agree the review recommendations will be reported to the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny and Communities Committee by December 2020. I think again, everybody's agreed that there needs to be a route and branch review carried out into the road service, and I would ask that elected members sort of go with this recommendation today. But again, in the scope of the review that is reported to the July full council, we can exactly, full council will be able to determine exactly how that review is carried out and indeed who carries it out. But I think that there's clear commitment there to make sure that both the communities and Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee have a role within that review. Yeah.
Thanks, Lee. I'll just come in at that point. So I think the first point was covered in regards to the procurement committee, and ultimately the transformation will make that decision whether it is or not, and I can outline that. In regards to the second point, I do think that it's important that there's two pieces of work there particularly that I think the Communities Committee should lead on, but ultimately there's a piece of work in regards to that the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee should lead on as well. So if we can agree to look at that, come back in July and we can get a chance to talk about that with this meeting, scope that out, and I think that's a fair enough proposal and a way forward.
Yes, I would suggest that we have discussions prior to coming to July when we can thrash out more about what I should expect each committee to do. And I agree there is definitely a role for Audit, Risk and Scrutiny, but we can ensure that we've got that properly discussed, all the delegations discussed, any changes that need to be discussed, and bring that back in July.
And I'm sure we'll have many conversations about these recommendations and the wider investigation for weeks and months to come. 2.6, agree in line with the best value audit that improvement be made to the presentation of information to committees in order that elected members can readily fulfil their scrutiny function, and further agree that the review of standing order subcommittee will receive a report in this matter, and I think we will do that as quickly as possible within the committee cycle that starts in September, and I think it would be quite appropriate for full council today just to make it clear to the proper officer that we would hope to have a review of standing order subcommittee scheduled as quickly as possible when the committee cycle restarts. And 2.7, agree that an increase in resource is required to support the scrutiny function of the council and elected members, and for a report to come back to full council in July with proposals. And completely agree that every member should be able to feed into this bit of work. Every member needs to make sure that they fully understand and have the full facts when making decisions, so it's absolutely appropriate that all elected members are able to feed into this piece of work. And I would suggest that we make sure that offline we have that conversation, and that the report that comes back to full council in July, make sure that every member is being consulted on.
I think we also wanted that the report that comes back in July should outline how we will consult in future. And we talked about the work that Sandy Gordon's subcommittee did in the past in terms of committee structures and so on. It could well be something similar where we could have workshops and so on that might enable all members to feed in and say, you know, with their experiences, with those who've been there a long time and felt for years that something was wrong, and you know, what were the obstacles to actually being able to pinpoint what the problems were to the other people who've probably been in different experiences and so on. So, I would expect the report in July not to be telling us what had been done, but actually to set the process by which we consult with members to identify what additional support is required for scrutiny to enable us to scrutinise our roles properly.
And finally, Lisa, if it's okay, I think it's fair to say that in these proposals and as administration has made clear today that, you know, we share the views of all councillors that there have been serious failings that have been identified in this contract, that the trust between officers and members is strained, and that, you know, certainly we will not be letting it go unnoticed, and that we fully commit to this work and making sure that the investigation is carried out as quickly and robustly as possible so that we do get the answers that we need. Thank you.
Just on that last point, because obviously I put in another recommendation for a brief discussion about with here, and that was that the Police and Galloway Council accepts and acknowledges the inadequacies and failings, and it goes on. And I think from the feeling I got from the discussion, I felt maybe a bit too strong, was particularly pointing at people. So was what you're saying at the end there, your last point, was that a particular recommendation? Or is something else that would address the point I think very strongly should be put across today? We need to recognise as a council that we have failed with this particular contract. If it feels that there's an emphasis put on particular departments, and people might take that personally, we'd like to get a way around about that, but we'll have to recognise that the council has failed from this contract 2013 to 18. And if we accept that, then that's the starting point in regards to resolving this. You've got to accept your failings to be able to progress and move forward. So
I don't think there's any doubt that actually people do it over many years. There have been serious failings in the way in which the council was operating, and the fact that the department seems to be able to consider itself to be out with the council and not responsible to the structures or the political governance of the council. You know, that was allowed to happen, really. That's a failing of the council.
It's amended to the Police and Galloway Council accepts and acknowledges the inadequacies and failings whilst undertaking the roads contracts with Transfer 2013 to 18. I think we need to publicly acknowledge that because of the level of unsettlement.
Point of order or clarification at least. Is this a meeting that's going on between Ian Carruthers and Adam Wilson, or are we all included?
And we're all, do you want to come in?
I do indeed, because it seems to be a you know, agreement there, or trying to reach agreement between Ian and Adam on it. Politics throws up many strange bedfellows. However, we have an amendment on the table that the matter be referred for external inquiries. I would hope in all these negotiations that seem to be taking place in front of our eyes, that we don't lose sight of this, that all else, you know, we still have this ability, which I know we have, to refer the matter for external inquiry. Is that part of that negotiation that's going on just now?
No. Can I make a very quick point?
Yeah.
So I think just in regards to, I mean, Councillor Scobie mentioned earlier, he felt, and there's some members of my group very strongly felt that, listen, they've lost enough confidence within the council that this should be handed out to somebody externally completely, as of straight away. So I think we need to have that level, that discussion. I think actually what Wally's saying as well, Councillor Scobie, I think he needs to either can get additionality or carry on with his amendment as he's proposed.
2 points. When discussions were taking place in the adjournment, and that was around, you know, the two amendments, or the motion that was on the table, and maybe the Tories' amendment. But there was also an issue in terms of noting 2.3 in terms of the integrity group and the makeup of that group. I think, you know, in any scoping or any further discussion, we need to discuss who actually forms that integrity group, if that's the way that we intend to go. And I come back to my point that there is an amendment, and if from the negotiations that were taking place there, that still remains on the table, then we would be quite happy to defer our amendment just now.
So, Willie, do you want that to be part of the report that goes to full council in July as to whether, or one of the options could be that some of it was externalised?
Yeah, that it's always an option for the council, for the members, to refer this matter for external inquiry.
Yeah.
That's built into it, I'm sure we can agree.
Yeah. So we need sure that comes to, that's part of the consideration we give at the July meeting as to whether we want to externalise it altogether.
Well, it was something that was given by the chair at the time when it became an investigation, and that was Archer, that said there would be internal first, and if need be, it would go to external investigation. But I think we need to keep that in as an option.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That's actually the point that I wanted to be clear about, that we were still under discussion whether or not we could totally internal the external or a mixture. The other thing, I do take on board what the officers were saying about the point in 2.5, which is that we are going to agree that a root and branch review is carried out to the management of the road service. I think that was something say rather than the road service itself. Is that, did I pick that up correctly?
That was quite really, it should be the management rather than indicated.
Right. Thank you.
Just on that point, when Adam outlined his case, my understanding was that he said there's really two aspects to that. One's about how do you actually get the best value, so we get as many potholes filled, so to speak, and pavements fixed, on and so forth, for the amount of money that will apply to that. But there's another aspect to that that leads into this actual, is there fraudulent criminality, so on and so forth, and that's where the two sides did we have. So some will certainly got communities, but the heavier side will go to audit the scrutiny committee. That was my understanding, what we've agreed with.
I think that'll be part of the content of the report that goes to full council will be to propose what parts of the investigation should go into which committee. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Leader. You hear me okay?
Yes, I think people were having a problem on hearing some of us, but...
Yeah, I've had one or two technical issues, but I'm following most of it. I've listened to to this in real detail, and I must admit, I tend to support Councillor Scobie in his first view. I think we have to thank Richard Greaveson on his extensive and really difficult investigation on the issues to date, but it seems to have gone a step beyond that. I also think my own leader mentioned acknowledging the failings of DG First, and I think that's correct, that we do have to be transparent. But I begin to feel that I think with immediate effect, I think we should suspend any further internal investigation and seek to appoint a totally independent investigation, possibly by the Auditor General. There has also been the mention of the police have been told. I think we should be referring to the police and asking them to look at it as well. This is a tandem investigation. I've had a brief conversation with my leader, but unfortunately with the distance involved, that has been difficult. But that's certainly strongly my view just now, and I would like to ask the views of others. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Just through you for Councillor Blake, just to reaffirm my earlier position, which maybe you didn't pick up with some of the difficulties, Councillor Blake. The police have been informed of this ongoing investigation and have been asked to be kept informed of progress. So they are readily available if they are required to be further involved, that they can be fully appraised of the position. So the police are aware of the situation.
Thank you. I take that reassurance. My other 4 points still stand. I really think the time has come that we need to seek a totally independent investigation.
Perhaps, Leader, it might be helpful, and thank you for respecting Councillor Blake, that I think that members are looking to independence to move forward from here. To support and drive that process. I think rehashing what Richard's done, I don't think that had particular value. In fact, it's just a language that members are looking for that independent leadership of the investigation moving forward. I'm sure that Richard would receive an enormous sigh of relief on that one, but certainly we could do that. That then could direct the internal resources, obviously the resources of our own integrity group, which we're required to do as well. So in fact, that would be possible. So the investigation moving forward from this could be led independently, or if members wish, we could speak to the Auditor General, and whether that may well, put us in a different niche of investigation. But all options are open to members for their consideration. So,
Councillor Nicholson.
Just on that same point, I don't know what part of the process we're in. We're in a process just now, and we haven't got everything place to actually then go into an external investigation, as far as I know, because looking at an independent specialist forensic financial expertise, looking at the finance, which will come to a conclusion in that. And then when that takes place and it comes back to the council along with others reports, as well as the police, where they are and their standing where they are, then it may be the case after that. Look at how we go forward externally.
I don't know what it is, but I'd like a 15-minute adjournment. I kind of got a meeting same as you, but I'll just be late for it at 2 o'clock, and that's why this is a wee bit rushed. But ultimately, something's been rushed. I feel that would be the point where that's why I said half an hour rather than an hour. It probably did deserve an hour when he said originally, but I need to communicate with my wider group in particular, because again, everything just broke down when we were trying to have this discussion. So if you didn't mind, give us 15 minutes. Yeah.
I'm quite happy to go forward. We've been sitting here for 3 hours in a half-hour break, and I think we can beat it to death. We can start playing about with different words and different sentences. But I think we've got to a stage now that we have to come to some kind of decision.
I think that the problem is that I'm not quite sure about how we way forward, whether we've got the agreement of either, to be honest. I would actually like the opportunity to get back to members of our administration to feel that they're confident about the way forward too. I know there's an issue that we are, 3 of us are here, or 4 of us are here, might have been at the IJB, but I think we just get, I think we're near to something. I think we're quite near to something, but it's what the scope of what happens in July, and I think certainly the importance of having the right sort of recommendations for people to consider all the options, including external, if necessary. So I take your point, I think it might be too early for an external inquiry just now.
Would perhaps we have a compromise that if members are willing, that since we have the internal processes and the engagement with the police and others just now, that we move to bring in someone external to oversee the process, to bring that independent, to ensure and give confidence to members that those internal processes are being operated freely, and then allow July members the opportunity to think of other options moving forward to give you that assurance. You know, we could perhaps a retired police superintendent. So just to give us an oversight to members can debate and consider it properly.
I'll come back on your point there, Gavin, you just raised about the external there, obviously somebody overseeing it. Who would be appointing this external person? Would it be a member appointment or would it be an appointment by directly yourself?
It's up to members how to decide. Before we've consulted our options with good leaders.
I remember in the past
Members took the decision on who they would wish us to move forward and approach. I think as I remember last time, I think in DG1 I brought 3 recommendations for members' consideration. I think it went to good leaders as who would want to take the review forward. So again, it would be for members to direct. All I would do is find the appropriate candidates for members' consideration.
But could members put forward appropriate candidates that, for an external investigation to oversee the process?
Well, I don't see no reason why not, but if you have any appropriate...
Oh, I've got a list in my pocket, so absolutely.
People that might be appropriate to do it. It would be for all members, I think, to decide.
Could we get even a 10-minute break? I mean, I've got reassurances earlier from a comment which I was aware of anyways, but Gavin made, that actually the Audit Risk Scrutiny Committee has a lot of tools at its hands and a lot of powers, and it can draw in and do different pieces of work. But again, I come back to the level of resource that it's got applied to it. It's one committee rather than 2. There's a number of issues there, but it still has a lot of tools. So if we can't come to agreement today, that'll be unfortunate. But we still have a lot of tools as the Audit Risk Scrutiny Committee that would use in regards to finalise this. But I'd rather come in and negotiate an agreement if possible. The whole council then recognises what's going on. 10 minutes, adjournment, I'll finish this. We'll come back and make a decision.
I'm happy to have 10 minutes because I would quite like to speak to the administration group as well. Okay, sorry. Yeah, Councillor Brody. Councillor Brody.
Again. What's happening? What's happening?
As Councillor Brody wanted to speak.
Yeah, thanks. I thought there was a discussion going on in the room rather than to the broader membership there. I think I mentioned earlier the need for external scrutiny, and I think the Chief Executive mentioned we have external auditors. Perhaps in this first instance we should get their take on it to see what support they can provide. Maybe that's the compromise. We can start with get their views first. After all, it's what we are paying them for. Maybe they've not done their job brilliantly, but that's what they're getting paid for. Perhaps our external auditors to start with.
External auditors are part of this report. They've been reporting to council on some of the information, and they've made it. They've been saying, so they've actually part of the original reports that went to council on external audit. So therefore you're getting them to then look at something that they've done as well.
Yes.
So I think it has to be, it gets crazy. The whole thing just going in circles.
Okay, can we get like 10 minutes? And we realise that's what's happening with the IGP, Andy?
It's okay, they're starting their core, so they'll be starting.
They can start even without you.
No, I'm not doing it, no. Penny's chairman.
Okay, so 10 minutes and then we'll just come back with something that is, that the IGP, and I think, you need to speak to everybody as well. 10 minutes only. Here, in terms of the report which comes back to full council in July, that will include the option of an external inquiry. But in having an external inquiry, we have to be quite sure about what the inquiry is into, what the scope of the inquiry is, which is a bit uncertain in our current discussions, but that we will look at that as one of the options on the report that comes back, and what the scope of that might be. But as for the wording of, looked quite carefully at the wording of our motion, but we couldn't really see any way of amending it, which made a lot of sense, but I just, in terms of, there wasn't anywhere particularly obvious where that would come in. But just to reiterate that our intention would be that the option of an external inquiry will be presented to full council in July, along with the scope of what that might be. Okay, can I invite Councillor Curran if you want to? Oh, Councillor Blake. Right, Councillor Blake.
Councillor Blake?
He's on.
Maybe that was
John Chandler's.
right. Somebody else. Yes, maybe. Whose hand is that?
That's what's on.
There's no hand up there at the moment.
Well, this is downstairs, down the bottom there, it says an 18th hand up.
Yeah. It's on and-
Okay, anybody else wanting to contribute?
I would like just to make the point, I don't know if Ian Blake can hear us or not, but we had a group discussion like yourselves, and Ian had some things that he would like to put to the full council. So if Ian's in there, I'd like him to lead in this if possible, if not, I'll lead myself. I'll probably say a couple of things in regards to last Thursday's meeting and complaints I had from my own group leader in regards to this setting. Unfortunately, Ian got put out at 3 o'clock, couldn't get back in to that meeting. And other members of the group were putting out back in, out, and it's probably expanding. It seems to be happening today again. It's back to some of the points that have been raised. In order to have a full and frank discussion, we need to be in the room, I think. I find this very, very difficult. Trying to have meetings out with our traditional ways of we are set up politically. We have got groups. That looks like it's coming in now. Thanks, Leader.
Councillor Blake.
Hello, leaders. Sorry about that. I did have some technical issues there, so I missed the discussion. I heard that Councillor Carruthers mentioned something. Could you ask him to repeat it now, please?
Repeat what you said again.
I was just waffling in really till you came in, because I said that you should be, you've got a lead in this.
Yep. Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to reaffirm the points I made earlier, that I think Richard Greaves has done a wonderful job. It's been a very complex matter. I certainly, even having 30 years in the police, I wouldn't have liked to have taken over that inquiry. He's done an excellent job as far as that's concerned, but I think it's now at a stage that's gone beyond that and probably beyond his expertise. I think the Councillor Carruthers mentioned earlier about that we should openly acknowledge the failings of DG first, and I think that stands. I think that has to go ahead. But I strongly feel that with from immediate effect that we should suspend any further internal investigation and seek to appoint a totally independent investigation, possibly by the Auditor General, if that is the way forward. Equally, I know that I had the assurance that the police were aware of the situation from Derek, and I do appreciate that, but there's a difference between the police being aware and the police being actively involved in an investigation. I think that part certainly has to be considered, but my main part is to cease the internal investigation with immediate effect and seek to appoint a totally independent investigator. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Was that now a Conservative amendment?
It is, Leader. We've discussed it as a group, and ultimately we do feel that this should take place. There has been options, as you've already outlined, in regards to it would be reconsidered, I think, in July to get to the bottom of that. But ultimately, there is an amendment in place now, and if he's moving that, I'll second that.
So I don't know what Councillor Sloan's position is now. I don't think his secondary is still here. Councillor Sloan?
We're quite clear on what we asked. We asked that the amendment that the matter be referred for external inquiry, you have given an assurance that there will be an option within the report that will come forward in July. So we have deferred that amendment for the time being, but we now have an amendment coming forward for Ian Blake, seconded by Ian Carruthers, which is not too dissimilar, but we have your assurance when we withdrew ours that that would be an option on the table in July. Ian, the both Ians have put forward the Tories amendment.
Okay, Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Leader. Just very briefly, as the seconder of the motion, that I think I still am, and I think picking up on Councillor Scobie's point, it bears rehearsing again on the public record that nothing we have set out precludes the possibility of further independent involvement, either in terms of specific professional expertise or wholesale investigation, if that's where the evidence leads us. I think that's very clear, and this administration has a track record, everyone will recall, when it comes to engaging very substantial independent external investigation of significant and serious items. So I am content that we have proposed a sensible and measured way forward, which does not preclude that possibility being determined by all members, indeed, when we meet again at the end of July. Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Hadman.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm just looking for a point of clarity, really, in terms of the proposal put forward by Councillor Blake. The further inquiry work in terms of the Appendix 2, if we're to move direct to an independent investigation, is it a proposal that that further inquiry work just simply stops and it all gets just put on hold? Because certainly my understanding is that we have this further inquiry work as part of the appendix that we're looking to take forward, which already includes the external request for the financial expertise of a specialist forensic accountant for that. So I'm just looking for clarity. If we were to move straight to an external investigation, is his proposal that all this further inquiry work that we're proposing just simply stops and a line is drawn under that?
That's what I took from what Councillor Blake was saying, but I'll ask him to confirm whether that is the case. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, that certainly is my point of view. That work won't be wasted. That work will be looked at by any internal investigation, as will any of the investigations taking place to date. So that certainly is the case. Stop with immediate effect. Thank you.
Do we intend to proceed to the vote?
Yeah.
Which will be my roll call.
Thank you, Leader. So just to clarify, so all are clear, we have the motion proposed by Councillor Wilson and seconded by Councillor Davidson.
That was actually proposed by myself, actually.
Been a long afternoon.
Yes, I went for clarification. Apologies. The motion being as circulated, as before, members, but also with the caveat taking on board the proposals put forward by Councillor Scobie and Sloan about having the option of an external investigation, and that to be considered by Council in July. That's the motion. The amendment proposed by Councillor Blake and seconded by Councillor Carruthers was to cease the internal investigation now and formulate an external investigation immediately. Members satisfied that that reflects motion and amendment? So we'll move to the vote. Leader?
Motion.
Deputy Leader?
Motion.
Councillor Bell?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Brodie?
Motion.
Councillor Doogie Campbell,
Motion.
Councillor John Campbell,
Motion.
Councillor Ian Carruthers,
Amendment.
Councillor Karen Carruthers,
Amendment.
Councillor John Charteris,
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster,
Councillor Dempster,
motion. Right, I'll take that as motion. Councillor Driver,
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale,
Amendment.
Councillor Fairbairn,
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson,
Motion.
Councillor Giusti,
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman,
Motion.
Councillor Howie,
Amendment.
Councillor Councillor Ingalls,
Amendment.
Councillor Johnston,
Amendment.
Councillor Lever,
Yeah, I get 2 votes.
Councillor Lever,
Motion.
Councillor Little, Councillor Little, Councillor Little, final call.
Motion.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor McGregor.
Amendment.
Councillor McCammon.
Amendment.
Councillor McClelland.
what taking time?
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor McKee.
Motion.
Councillor Marshall.
Motion.
Councillor Martin.
Motion.
Councillor Nicholson.
Motion.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, I get 2 votes. Amendment.
Can you confirm that, Councillor Scobie? Amendment.
Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Sloan has left. Councillor Stitt.
Motion.
Councillor Surtees.
Motion.
Councillor Tate.
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Councillor Wood.
Amendment.
Councillor Young.
Motion.
Did he call me?
We have 21 members voting in favour of the motion, with 16 in favour of the amendment. Therefore, the motion is carried.
Are you certain that everybody has voted it?
Motion's carried.
Motion's carried.
Right,
Yeah, we have 37 members on present, either in the room or online, and we have 37 votes.
Well, the members, given the debate, and members have agreed now that we consider the July paper. If members are content, I will ask the monitoring officer to seek advice from Audit Scotland on the way forward, so that paper can be fully informed for member consideration. If members wish me to instruct the monitoring officer to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. Then the final part of the meeting was to get an update, if there is any update. I understand Julian was going to give it to us.
Happy to lead up. Thank you. We just to tell you what's happened. All parents have been written to expressing there are two options available: the option for the blended model and moving to 100%. We've agreed a process with the joint trade unions to be able to engage with them if things develop over the July period. We're still awaiting confirmation on the transport issue, which of course is the big factor for Dumfries and Galloway's rural authority. The Cabinet Secretary has made it clear that the announcement will either be in and around the 4th of July or towards the end of July when the full commission, depending upon progress of the virus. So we've also arranged through head teachers to be able to contact all parents depending upon how the situation moves during that period, to make them sure they're fully informed as soon as we know forward. And we're preparing options, particularly around transport and others, on the two options currently referred to in government as 4A and 4B. So there might be rules for schools that are not rules for the general public, and other ways around. So just to say, members, we haven't had any further guidance, but we have communicated with parents, have the ability to communicate with all parents through the holidays, and a process agreed with trade unions to enable us to engage with trade unions if we need to move on, perhaps the blended approach. The blended approach is what we have planned for, but we've also now got the second plans available for the 100% start. However, we still obviously need to work through some of the issues, particularly for our most vulnerable children, and that really will depend upon the status of the virus at that point. So we have not had any further guidance. As soon as that guidance is available, I'm sure it's copied to all members.
There's nothing on transport and some of the other
Transport. As soon as we have an announcement on transport, we'll be able to confirm directly to members out with meeting what that impact might be and bring a full report to members at the end of July.
Any questions for Gavin?
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hannon.
Thank you, Leader. I didn't have any questions on this one that was on the previous agenda item that I was looking for clarity. Thank you.
Okay, in that case I'll close the meeting. Thanks very much for that. Thanks to members for their attendance, and I think we will have to have a good look at the agenda for the July meeting, because I think foresee there being 2 meetings in July, as well as 2 meetings in June. This matter may have to be I think we need to look at the agenda and see whether this matter maybe needs to be a separate meeting.
At least we go. Thank you, Chair.
Ian, you just going to stay here?
Thanks, Leader.
Leader.
Thank you.
Been deferred, I thought.
No, well, it was the third
Thank
half plus.
you, Leader.
That's what June.
According to the deferred.
Oh, I said then you have to defer the meeting.
There are a couple of things to do.
Well, it's fine, just.
Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of full council to consider the item which was deferred at the meeting on the 25th of June. We have some members participating remotely, and the meeting is being live streamed. So can I remind members about the good practice guide which has been updated and circulated to us. It includes muting microphones and switching off videos when you are not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write "speak" in the Teams chat function, and you will be invited to speak in order. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we deal with the business as efficiently as possible and people aren't asking the same question more than once. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. And if you have to leave the meeting for any reason, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, so you switch it off altogether, or you write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you return. This will allow the governance officers to monitor member presence and ensure that the meeting is quorate. And can I plead with you, please do not do anything on camera which you would not do in the council chamber if you're attending a council meeting. And I can also remind people that there are 2 items up for discussion today, the third item and potentially an update on the education restart. Those are the only 2 items which are up for discussion, so we will not be revisiting any decisions made at our meeting on Thursday. I also remind members again, in considering the items on today's agenda, some of which can be seen as sensitive, we must avoid raising the matters publicly concerning the conduct or capability of either current or former officers of the council. We don't enjoy parliamentary privilege, and any comment considered to be slanderous could result in a member being reported to the Ethical Standards Commissioner or even being sued. This advice does not, of course, fetter members' ability to be candid about their views on matters, but we do need to be cautious in referring to individual officers or disciplinary matters, as members have a role on the Employment and Appeals Subcommittee. Nick, can you provide the sederant indicating who is participating remotely and any apologies, please?
Thank you, Leader. We have 41 members present, either in the room here or online. We have an apology from either Hislop. So 41 members present at the start of the meeting.
Okay, and I confirm my approval of these members listed who are, I don't think we have a list of people participating remotely, or is that too difficult?
Other than the 11 in here who are for the benefit of people listening in online, we have in the room we have councillors Graham Bell, Ian Carruthers, Andy Ferguson, Malcolm Johnson, John Campbell, Jane Maitland, myself, Leader Elaine Murray, Ronnie Nicholson, Stephen Thompson and Adam Wilson, as well as Doug Fairburn. Apologies.
Thanks. So I confirm my approval of the other members who are participating remotely. So do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? And I believe that Henry McClellan has, as he did last time. Henry, are you?
Leader, it's the same as Thursday. My declaration of interest relates to my employment with LIP Construction, which ceased on the 31st of January 2019. So I do have a declaration of interest in item 3. I have also previously made the Director aware of the report being issued, and I also need to note that I have removed myself from any scrutiny discussions relating to this report. I won't be taking any part in the discussions today, but as the meeting is virtual, I will listen to proceedings and rejoin the meeting when we discuss agenda item 4. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Henry.
Leader, just a small point. Is this a new meeting or a continuation of the last meeting?
This is a new meeting. I believe we didn't actually adjourn the previous meeting, so it's a new meeting. Well, has Councillor Scobie got a declaration of interest?
No, Chair, I've got a preliminary issue that I want to raise, and that's to seek your assurance. Sorry, Chair.
My assurance.
Can I hear you?
Assurance.
Yes, could I have your assurance that we will be in the one room for future meetings, because I don't think this is satisfactory, because I don't feel a part of a meeting somewhere else. So I want your assurance that we will be accommodated in the one room for future meetings here on in.
Is somebody able to give Councillor Scobie that assurance? I can't, because I don't book the rooms.
Sorry, Chair.
I cannot give you that assurance. I am not responsible for booking rooms, so I shall pass you on to Nick.
Can we have those that have that authority to give us that assurance that we will be in the one room here on in. So are arranging the meetings that we are in the one room, because I don't feel I'm part of that meeting and it's our right to be here.
Leader, I can confirm that the arrangements for the July meeting, which will be able to accommodate members in one room or online, the previous decision that was taken by this council. So therefore, I'm happy over the coming period to provide members details of when we have got that secured. That is our intention.
Okay, shall we move on to agenda item 3, the 4th generation trunk road maintenance management contract. The purpose of this report is to consider the investigation and improvements relating to the 4th generation trunk road maintenance management contract. As this issue is within the remit of the Communities Committee, under Standing Order 3.1, we are required to withdraw delegation to consider it. So can I have members' agreement to do that? I welcome the investigation and the thoroughness of the approach taken, including the ongoing work being overseen by the Integrity Group. In addition, I am pleased that we are discussing the report in public, as this is quite rightly a matter of public interest, and we believe in being transparent and open in our discussions. Derek Crichton is here to introduce the report, along with Richard Greaveson, who is here to assist members with any questions arising from the investigation. I'd like to thank Richard and Derek for their thoroughness in doing this piece of work for us. And Paul Garrett is available on Teams. Now, the administration is proposing a number of additional recommendations which we have circulated, and which I think Adam is going to put up on Teams for our remote members to see. And these are to introduce a number of additional recommendations. 2.4, agree that a review should be carried out by the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee on our internal financial procedures and procurement standing orders, to ensure that we have much stronger assurances that these are complied with and effective to reflect today's operating environment, and agree the scope of this review to be reported to full council in July 2020, and further agree that the review recommendations will be reported to full council by December 2020. 2.5, agree that the Root and Branch review is carried out into the road service, agree the scope of this review should be reported to full council in July 2020, and further agree the review recommendations will be reported to the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny and Communities Committees by December 2020. 2.6, to agree, in line with the recent best value audit, the improvements be made to the presentation of information to committees in order that elected members can readily fulfil their scrutiny function. And we further agree that a review of the Standing Orders Subcommittee will receive a report on this matter. And finally, 2.7, agree that an increase in resources required to support the scrutiny function of the council and the elected members, and for a report to come back to full council in July with proposals. So I will move these amendments on behalf of the administration, and I believe Councillor Davison is going to second. Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning. I'm happy to second those additional recommendations tabled on behalf of the administration. This is a very bad report. It is also, I have to say, a very good piece of work, and those two things are not mutually contradictory. I'm very grateful for the efforts that officers, and Mr. Greaveson in particular, have expended in a lengthy and detailed investigation of these issues, and I appreciate the very clear, understandable, and logically laid out report that he has produced, which goes over a complicated and deeply disappointing chain of events that did ultimately result in a significant loss to the public purse in this region. I don't think that any member will be of an alternative opinion than that is entirely unacceptable, and it is necessary that, even though we recognise that changes have already been made, this being a matter that dates back some years now, further examination of our processes, and particularly how members are empowered to scrutinise the business of the council and finance and procurement in particular, is necessary And I hope that these recommendations will have broad support across the chamber. I'm conscious that members will have a great deal to say and many questions to ask in this report, so with your leave, Leader, I'll wind up there, but I'm very happy to second the administration's recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, Councillor Carruthers, I believe you have some of the amendments also that you wish to put forward.
Do, Leader, so we're happy to have the debate, have the way debate, get the actual report presented to us, have the discussions, the questions asked, and then maybe take an adjournment if that was possible. We would put that, discuss that maybe for 10-15 minutes and come back and put forward a proposal. It's some small amendments to what you've already proposed.
Okay, I'm happy to have a recess later on, but we'll have the discussion first. And I've got Councillor Driver and Councillor Driver.
Thanks very much, Leader. I'm just looking at the report itself. Remit for the investigation. Perhaps some clarification that all of the remit is under.
Councillor Driver, we're losing you a bit. Can you get a bit closer to your device?
Yeah, sorry, Leader. Can you hear me better now?
That's better, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Leader. I'm just looking at 3.2 of the report itself with regards to the remit of the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee prior to the Responsibility Communities Committee. And I just want sort of comments from either Derek or Richard that all of the remits in the bullet points have been covered in the investigation.
Thank you, Leader. Happy to confirm, Councillor Archer-Driver, that that is the case. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. I think I've got a couple of questions that I want to pose to officers. Just very quickly on the proposals that have been put forward, I completely agree with them. And for particularly item 2.4, I would just like to say that obviously there'll be a review carried out by the Finance Procurement and Transformation Committee, which I am chair of, and I'm more than happy to commit to opposition groups so we can have a discussion about what that review will look like and the scope before those proposals come to full council. And I'm more than happy to have those discussions as quickly as possible so that we can do this in a sort of cross-party spirit as much as possible. However, turning to the report, I'm sure that we'll have many things to say and we've got many views on it, but I think I'll stop short of saying mine just because I think everybody says their individual views will be here until 5 o'clock again. I've got a particular number of questions that I particularly want to pose to Gavin as Chief Executive. I think there was two things.
Leader, that was my point. That's why I raised my hand. I think it's appropriate that we do get the paper presented to us and then get into the questions if that's okay.
Okay, sorry, my apologies, Derek.
No, it's all.
Yeah, it's not my nose.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Good morning, members. As you know, as part of last year's budget setting process, the Council agreed in February 2019 to establish a unified road service, including removing the commercial trading operation. Arising from this, the Council gave new delegations to both the Communities Committee and Director. At that time, I identified there were three big challenges: the successful refurbishment and opening of DG1, transforming our waste service to embrace recycling, and indeed creating that one joined up road service. This is an investigation into a historical contract which ended over 2 years ago. And the Council has previously made provision for the financial losses incurred. Whilst financial provision has been made in the Council's accounts, it was apparent that I needed to fully understand the causes of these losses. And that is why I brought forward proposals for an investigation, the scope of which is set out in your papers and was agreed at the EEI Committee on the 2nd of July 2019. I appointed Richard Greaves in to undertake the investigation, and Richard had full access to appropriate internal and external professional advice. As you know, members, the findings of the investigation are set out in Appendix 1 to the report. The investigation findings are pretty stark, and it states the service had insufficient capacity and capability to appropriately manage the contract over its lifetime. Likewise, the investigation highlights the financial risks involved in trading need to be comprehensively assessed. It is now apparent that the transfer of risk to the Council as a result of taking on this contract was never identified. Put simply, when you are trading, there is both an opportunity to return a surplus as well as a loss. I acknowledge that it's essential that we address any issues of integrity and internal control, and that's why the Council's Integrity Group is undertaking further analysis of issues arising from the investigation findings. Details of this are set out in Appendix 2. Thank you, Leader. Having set out the strategic context, I would now suggest it's appropriate to hear from Richard Greaveson in the detail of the investigation.
My apologies, Derek.
Not at all.
I wasn't thinking that you wanted to say anything.
Not at all.
Richard.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Derek. Good morning, members. In terms of an overview and detail of the investigation, this has been a particularly challenging but comprehensive exercise for a number of reasons. Most notably, the need to review, where available, information associated with the contractual operating arrangements over a prolonged period of time, dating back to the previous second and third generation contracts and the fourth generation contract. Secondly, the examination of very detailed contract management information, operating procedures and protocols. Thirdly, interpretation of financial analysis and data, which was held in more than one financial management system. And finally, various personnel changes of those responsible and involved within the management and the delivery of the contract over a number of years. I've had excellent professional assistance from colleagues in procurement, internal audit and finance, both internal and external to the Council. I have interviewed a number of current and, with their agreement, previous employees of the Council, together with representatives of the appointed operator, Scotland Transurb. Appendix 1 of the papers before members summarises the investigation and my findings specific to the remit as detailed at 3.2 of my covering report. And the key messages to members today are as follows. My investigation did not identify evidence of appropriate or sufficient risk management processes undertaken prior to entering what was a very different 4G contract in terms of size, scale and complexity when compared to the previous 2G, 3G contracts. Furthermore, the service did not seek appropriate guidance and support from other professional services within the Council prior to entering the contract. The process of contract negotiation, agreement of terms or the specific detail of its ongoing performance were a critical contributor to the outcome, and the detail was not reported through the Council's committee process, nor was this detail reported to the Council's senior leadership team. The investigation identified poor oversight and management as well as an inadequate level of resource. Financial monitoring arrangements were not fit for purpose within the service, and a greater degree of challenge and scrutiny external to the service should have been applied. Finally, the service did not comply with the Council's procurement standing orders which applied at the time, nor in fact did the service comply with the terms of the contract itself. It's clear to me, members, that specific to this contract, financial and risk management controls were not fit for purpose. The remit of the investigation also, however, required me to consider how financial controls and risk management arrangements could be improved. I therefore draw members' attention to sections 3.9 to 3.21, inclusive of my recovery report. The final point, members, is to reaffirm that as a result of the investigation and the information presented within my report, the Director has engaged the services of the Council's Integrity Group to undertake further analysis of issues arising from the investigation findings, and this detail is set out in Appendix 2. Given the significant financial information related to the investigation, as Derek has said, colleague Paul Garrett has joined the meeting, and through you, Leader, Paul and I are happy to take questions.
Thanks very much. Just before we go back to the questions, can I remind members about switching their videos off? We've still got a lot of videos on. I can see one councillor seems to be being represented by a cup of coffee at the moment. So you make sure that you switch your video off as well as your audio off. And if you're not in the meeting, you could leave and return when you come back. Okay, thanks. Okay, Councillor Wilson, you still had some questions you wanted to ask.
Thank you, Leader. I won't go over what I said previously. Just to make sure as many members can get in as possible. So, just I wondered, there's a couple of questions that, if okay, I would ask directly to Gavin as Chief Executive. Also, during this contract, there was quite a comprehensive restructure. I think 2014, 2015, 2016, thereabouts, in which a number of chief officers were matched into their posts. So I would like to get some assurances about the processes that were put in place at that point to identify any skills or knowledge gaps that you did in conjunction with HR during that matching process, and to make sure that those were addressed through various means. And also during and after that matching process, that appraisals were carried out, and to get any clarification as to if the truncated contract was raised in those appraisals and what action was taken as a result. I think particularly on behalf of my group as well, I would quite like an explanation to some things that happened. So during the duration of the contract, governance advice was not always sought, and it almost feels like to us that there was a special treatment was given to some items and to the DG First Committee. An item in 2012 was taken, but there was no written report. And more recently, meetings were cancelled without consultation with the chair, which is out with the process that would usually follow. Procurement procedures were not implemented, as we've heard, and a culture was allowed that procurement advice was not routinely sought. Why internal audit failed to pick up any discrepancies, and why finance and the Section 95 officer, what assurances were received either by the Section 95 officer or yourself as to the reason and what work was done when we were, at Policy and Resources Committee advised to write off some of this debt. We've heard much of two different accounting software. It's not an argument I'm prepared to accept. As Chief Executive and Section 95 officer, you have significant delegations to have this information, to receive it one way or the other, and I would appreciate an explanation on those couple of points.
Thank you, Leader, for yourself. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Regarding, I think if we take them in order, regarding the restructuring, on the director's appointments I was directly involved in at the time, I had a peer review process which was undertaken by the neighbouring chief executive who did a peer review in it. At that time, there were no skill gaps identified in that matching process. Given the skills, experience, length of time and professional status of the individual, particularly in this matter. Following through the appraisals, absolutely the issue of the financial performance of the service was raised, and in fact through the process there were two, if not three, financial recovery plans and recovery plans that are presented to members. It's also included assurances that the budget, particularly moving forward into 2019, was complete, and I think that came to the Management Committee in September 2018 from memory. So, and that was based upon the evidence that was presented both from councils, the technical system, and from the external audit, and the training was subject to external audit by two separate audit firms. So, which did identify that there was issues in relation to trading that are difficult and the run being surplus, and therefore the recovery plans that were submitted was to bring and rectify that position. The issue that of the accounting system, the accounting system issues were never raised with the internal control system. That is a particular issue, nor was the Section 95 officer or the monitoring officer that they exercise other than access to myself or to the council in relation to substantial weaknesses within that process. But the issues of the fixed term contract, which Clare reported, I think it was 2014-15, when a loss following bad weather was reported. And therefore a recovery plan was sought and received at that time, and in fact the financial performance appeared to improve the following year. So again, it was the emergence of the significant difference between the positions reported in the 2018 accounts, which reported a loss that would granted the write-off of the equivalent of, I think it was $500,000, Paul will have the exact details, to then an emergence of the £2.9 million that emerged as the final accrual was subject to testing. That's when the emergence came. To that point, the overall loss of the £25 million contract was indicated within £500,000 to be written off against the council. So again, those are issues that we need to be looked at as to why the system did not pick that up at any level, that there was this fundamental issue within the system. But in relation to the information that was presented to members, the members were aware that there was challenge in trading. It could have related to the fact there were 3 significant winters during the period of the account, but certainly there was nothing presented to members or through the system we talked about that indicated these fundamental issues that Richard's been through emerged. In fact, the crystallisation was around that last accrual that was put in at the end of the contract in 2018-19. But I do emphasise again, 3 reports were brought to committee in relation to that year-end outcome in 2018-19, which indicated that a write-off of £500,000 would be equivalent to do it. So again, that's how then that emerged in the range that we would get there. Again, the write-off of debt, yes, members did question and scrutinise. In fact, it was raised and highlighted through the audit report. It was considered, but the nature of trading at £500,000, whilst it would be disappointing, would not have indicated the fundamental weaknesses that have emerged at this time. And therefore, there's no evidence, I think, that Richard was able to find of that being brought through the whistleblowing policies, the fraud and corruption policies, or reports through to other members. There's no evidence that any of that actually existed in relation to this. And again, that's an issue, I think, that we need forensic accounting to find out as to why, when surely the culture must have known. And again, I think Richard has reference to the nature of the culture that did exist in the previous DG First, then moved forward into enterprise and services, that the bold changes in management would have led to a different approach, but obviously that is deeply embedded in some aspects of the council and the services. So no excuse, absolutely, and that would be pretending. But again, we have not been able to find the evidence of where that was being signalled through the internal control system beyond the fact that it was a very reported difficulty. Surplus nature of the fixed of the contract, and that more levels of loss were going to be made on the contract, and that then led members to take decisions around the final in 2018 in advance of knowing the 2.9 million to withdraw from trading and to eliminate enterprising services and restructure around a new organisation, which was those proposals were being developed in September 2018 and at the back of the reporting position to enterprise services at the time. So it's not subsequent to that, at that time those proposals were first being discussed with them. So again, I can't put the finger on where that smoking gun was, but definitely it was between the 2018 position and the final accruals being tested that the size and scale of this emerged.
I thank you for that answer. I'm sure it's not the first. The only thing will be some of the questions I'll be asked today, and I'm sure that we'll return to many of them over the coming weeks and months. Just on one final bit, obviously the integrity group is now working on this, and they're providing, and their role, as outlined in our policies, is to provide the support as and when required. I think to ensure that that process is robust and remains its integrity, I just want reassurance that all the members of the integrity group and yourself have considered if there is a conflict of interest, given the rules that some members of the integrity group have had over the last couple of years, and to make sure that there has been a discussion about whether anybody feels there's a conflict of interest in this process. It's not for us, obviously, to judge if there's a conflict of interest, but I think it's important that to make sure that process is robust, that at least that conversation is had and there's a consideration as to whether there's any conflicts of interest. And I appreciate just the assurance that has been done or that will be done in due time.
I think there's a question, the technical group obviously, report directly to the council of its findings to move on from that. And the debates have been held and following members' consideration today. But again, we'll review both the support to the group and membership of the group in light of comments that members have been issuing today. But the questions have certainly been asked, and members of the integrity group, obviously, some are not present when this contract was taken forward. Absolutely happy to provide that assurance to the joint committee.
I would remind if that's okay.
Yes, I don't issue with you, just to remind me that I have forgotten to identify the report, as you have another question.
Thank you. No, I do, and it's kind of, so some of my questions later on were probably similar nature to what Adam just asked there, so I'll just try and go a little bit beyond it, Gavin. We'll think back to a couple of weeks ago at a group leaders meeting where I said, listen, I need to go to you, and I was put to both of you, but I need to hear from a Section 95 officer as well. And the question was, where did you see yourself in this? But explicitly, I would like to understand where you felt your role was in this, but actually, when did you actually first become aware of that information, these accruals, the level nearly just short of £3 million? At what point in time was that? Was that when it was reported to committee? Was that before that? I'm just interested to know when that was. But that question then has to be posed, and we need to get to the Section 95 officer just for clarity, Leader. I've got some other questions for by that, but I'll get that one answered first if that's okay.
Happy to provide the Councillor John's answer. It was when the director brought the matter to my attention, following a discussion he'd had with Section 95 officer. The director came immediately following that meeting to my office. I think that would have been May 2019. May 2019. So the director came in and said that the agreed, sort of previous reporting position had moved significantly, and that he wished to undertake an investigation. So it would be May 2019 was the first time that Paul, at the conclusion of the accounts, informed the director that there was a significant issue, that there was closed.
Can I ask the same question in the Section
There's
95?
a bit of a problem with the sound, and some of the people that are typing in there that the sound is not very good.
I think if we could just ask everyone to try and speak up a little bit and project towards the microphone, hopefully that will help people listening online.
The problem is remembering to speak at the mic instead of the person. I got with that again last week.
I would like to ask, I see Paul's preparing to come in, but I would like the same question put to Paul, get an understanding when he knew, but maybe even elaborate wider, Paul, because obviously reflecting back, why did it come to your point? Was it the same reason as what Gavin just outlined to him, as late in the day, should that have been picked up on beforehand, especially as Section 95 officer?
Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Leader. Yes, as the Chief Executive says, it was as part of closing the 2018-19 accounts, end of April, start of May, at that stage when the extent of this issue became apparent. We had identified and reported the end of both the 16-17 and 17-18 financial years, issues in relation to the performance of the Roads trading operation, and in particular at the end of the 17-18 financial year, concerns regarding the operation of the Transurf contract, and both of those received a profile both through the EEI committee and corporately through the Policy and Resources committee. However, at that stage, the full extent of the issue wasn't apparent, and it was through the testing of that accrual that was undertaken at the end of the 17-18 financial year. It was at the testing of that and identifying the amounts that were actually receivable in terms of monies that had been identified as being due to the council. It was when we tested that at the 18-19 financial year end, that's when the extent of the shortfall became apparent. At that stage, I communicated that with the relevant director and also with the Chief Executive at the time, and that would be at the start of May 2019.
Again, thanks very much, Lou, for letting me come in. So again, I've asked this question to both of you already, so I'll just ask it again. Do you feel this information was screened from yourselves or even potentially misled? These level accruals, not normal practice to accrue as much on an annual basis. Certainly it showed accruals, but didn't show it collectively. do you feel that it was withheld from yourselves, or do you feel you were misled?
Happy to come back in there, Leader. In terms of whether it was withheld or misled, that's something that the investigation has not been able to identify at this stage. There was the level of accruals was significant, but it was backed up with detailed information. However, further review of that detailed information in the subsequent financial year identified that although detailed, that information was not robust. What was apparent through the investigation was that the record keeping, the extent of reconciliations with amounts due to amounts actually received was not satisfactory. There was a degree of confusion within the service about how much they were actually due to recover. So I don't think I could say firmly at this stage whether or not there was any effort to mislead officers, and I think that's something that requires further review. And I think as reflected in Appendix 2 to today's papers, it's identified that is subject to ongoing consideration.
Thanks very much for that, Leader. Allowing me to ask questions. So a couple of small points. It's not my right to hog this meeting by any means, but I think through the recommendations that we agreed, the decision we actually make will be able to, I think it's the start point. I mean, it's the first time I've read a report and shouted at a report as much. I have to admit I got quite angry to read this report, and you sit back and reflect again. Just in regards to that, I felt that then so much information had been withheld from members, and this could have been addressed so much sooner. But obviously, we'll get to that point. Paragraph 3.24 says, probably for yourself, Richard, potentially, but it states in there key issues have already been addressed. So, taking into account, you've said the key issue around about procurement, contracts management, such like has already been addressed within that actual paragraph. So, taking into consideration that so within this particular department, HR are heavily involved at the moment. I'll not go any further than that. That would lead me to believe that these points have not been fully addressed and need to be addressed further. There's particular issues still within that department potentially. So that would make me think, okay, that these policy procedures, protocols are not fit for purpose. And a secondary question at the moment as well, so that it also talks about the special forensic team. I think it's Appendix 1, Appendix 2. So who's on that? How independent is that group of the council?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Carruthers. Certainly, in terms of the assurances that systems, procedures and policies have been enhanced and improved and applied, as I said before, certainly the detail in my cover report in relation to the procurement arrangements, the financial management, financial controls and purchase to pay projects, etc., all would give me assurances and evidence that there are systems and procedures that have been amended and updated and applied. Obviously, within every single council department, they then require to be followed by managers, and I would expect that to be critical across the whole council. But the systems and procedures have absolutely been updated, and I believe are significantly more enhanced than historically in these areas. The financial forensic team has been appointed entirely independent from the council. It's been a process that's been undertaken by the director responsible for that area, and as I say, as a consequence, they are entirely independent from the local authorities.
So just to expand, I want to give us an indication. Is it another authority, a private company? What is it? I haven't been asked to ask for that particular detail. You have to name the people, Richard.
My understanding, Councillor Carruthers, is that it's a separate and independent organisation, not of the local authority, but a separate independent organisation from the council.
Councillor John Campbell.
Thanks, Leader. I've got 3 points to pick up on this. I mean, it's quite a damning report as it is, and hopefully Richard can help us out with it. On 2.6, it says that there were limited written contracts, which left the majority of risk, with the council. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe elaborate a wee bit more on why that was the case. The other point I wanted to make was the contract concluded in April, but it wasn't officially signed off until the March. I'm just wondering why that was the case. And also the Policy and Resources Committee on the 13th of June 2019 was the first time that they got sight that there was an operational deficit of 2.899 million. Now, if the contract ended in April 2018, why did it take almost a year before things started to come to light? You know, was there something wrong with our own internal processes that, you know, that dragged this out for such a long time? I would imagine that, you know, if things like this were coming to the fore, it should have been a lot quicker. I just wonder if you can elaborate a wee bit, Richard.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Leader. In terms of risk and risk management to the local authority, particularly in terms of entering into the contract, there are a range of issues and challenges that were evidenced through the investigation. I think that the primary and critical shift of risk related to the change from a schedule of rates arrangement to a lump sum schedule of rates and discrete priced scheme, which transferred significant risk and financial business risk, if you like, to the council. As an example of that, in terms of the detail of the contract, that specific element related to poor weather, with a fixed price being agreed for delivery of winter maintenance, which resulted in the council operating at a loss when the region experienced a bad winter. So the management of that process and the transfer of risk was a significant one, and was out with our control. If it was a bad winter, we were only still paid the fixed amount we received for that element of the contract, and there was no defined parameters of what would allow a winter to be profitable for the council based on an agreed fixed lump sum. So that, I think, is a critical starting point and a key area. Secondly, where rates were agreed and formed part of the contract in terms of the schedule of rates element thereof, there was a significant number of items that were priced at penny rates, which were costly to the council when such items were instructed by Transurf. I also talked a little bit about how then the process was applied and the fee note and the construction of the bill, which is a further complexity and a further challenge, which again I think left the council at risk in terms of the calculation of each of the bill of bills associated with each fee note, which were A, complex, and B, undertaken by Scotland Transurf on behalf of the authority, which is unusual in that set of circumstances. So there are a range of elements and challenges in terms of risk, I guess, to the local authority that were very different in this 4G contract to those that have previously been applied. In terms of the contract itself, it's a number of colleagues, when interviewed, talked about the fact that the contract was not signed, primarily because you can't sign a contract until both parties are in full agreement of its terms, and this took time to negotiate. When I spoke to our legal team, they advised that absolutely the contract had been signed late in its term. That was predominantly to protect the council moving forward in terms of any further legal action, but clearly it should have been signed by both parties at the initial outset, but it wasn't. I don't know whether through you, Leader, in terms of the financial questions around 2019, whether that would be appropriate for Paul to answer with your blessing.
Okay, Paul.
Yes, I think the question was around why did it take till effectively a full year after the end of the contract to identify the extent of the issue. In response to that, the management team within the service were involved in ongoing discussions with Transurf during that period, and as part of monitoring discussions with myself and officers, there was a strong degree of assurance regarding the recoverability of the amounts outstanding. The indication was that these were kind of tidy up contract end discussions, that there was a few issues to be addressed at the edges, but that the amounts indicated were likely to be recovered, and there were strong assurances to that effect. It was only through the testing of that when we came to the 18-19 financial year end that it became apparent that that was unlikely to be the case. So that was the reason there was that delay. But as I said, as soon as that became apparent, that was communicated to the relevant director and then to members at the earliest opportunity.
Councillor David James.
Good morning, leaders. Is it me? My turn?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's great. I have had a poor audio. It's better now, but we're leaving procurement till later, I hear. Is that right?
No, I think you can ask about procurement whenever you like.
Okay, got that wrong then. So to kick off, in 2017, it was the first opportunity I had after being elected. I tried to put down a motion to disband enterprising services. And I well remember the derision from Labour members who steadfastly defended the department. The point being that it was absolutely common sense that the council operating as a diverse entrepreneur that was going to asphalt Ayrshire and cater for Cumbria was never going to work, and it was bound to end badly. So of course it's very good news to me that this enterprise is now being wound down. And it was especially not going to work given that we've got lousy procurement. And I've been fobbed off so many times when I've asked about procurement. I've been told that we've got the best practices, we use Scottish Government templates, etc., etc. And the implication is always as good as it's been as good as it can be. So I wish to ask the Chief Executive, what kind of internal culture have we got in these meetings when I'm sort of smelling a rat and I'm getting continual assurances that everything's okay, and now it turns out we need a full review? And is it just defensiveness on the part of officers, or is it because I'm just one councillor who's pressing these points? But it's a bit galling to find out we're actually at square back at the start as far as procurement goes when I've been flagging that up for 3 years. 3.13 to 3.16 tend to imply that there's indeed been some effort already to improve procurement. That's passed me by, presumably because I haven't been on the committees that have been handling that, and it would have been good to have had a chance to feed in. And if I could just feed in a couple of tips at the moment, I think it's always good to start your contract and assume the worst case scenarios like fraud, war, pandemic, etc. And if things work well, that's just like the icing on the cake at the end of the contract. And our contracts that I've seen, the few I've seen, are actually very rose-tinted, glass-wearing contracts, and they're not really got a strong base fundament to them. And also, if we've got important deals to do, I think we should consider more often bringing in hired guns, because they understand contracts, they know the contractors, and the contractors know that if they mess around this time, then there won't be any future contracts coming from these sources. So, you know, when it's important, I think that's going to be a really good idea to outsource that to the right type of person. The report itself is, it's of course very well written by Richard, but it is indeed an internal report, and it'll be difficult to tell the public this is not just an exercise in hand wringing and protection of chums and trotting out of phrases like lessons have been learned, which I think is civil service speak for our next debacle will be different from our last one. The culture mentioned here is that somehow these guys didn't know they were part of the council. Well, that would mean that we, the councillors, are a very soft touch if people attending our committees don't actually realise who they're working for, and that might be something that we all need to reflect on. And leader, if I may close with this, I find it, you know, of course, very difficult to get into the mindset of a socialist, and it's hard to know what's going on in your head when you've just lost another £3 million of taxpayers' money due to mission creep. But maybe you just think, okay, we'll just raise the taxes more. But I'll tell you what I think. I think instead of trying to manipulate roads repair market and launch social engineering products and forcing through flood prevention schemes, if we just gave out 1,000 youth entrepreneur startup grants of £3,000 each. That would do a lot more to make Dumfries and Galloway flourish than any of the madcap big state interventions that we tend to go in for. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor James. I should maybe point out that the improvements in procurement strategy and standing orders were actually effected by the previous administration, and neither you nor I would have had anything to do with that. That was actually came into effect in March 2017. I don't know whether the councillor, any of our officers have any comments on that.
I think just to,
must be great to be always right, though, isn't it?
to emphasise that absolutely.
You're starting to learn that.
So that we're not proposing a fundamental review of procurement on the back of this report. Audit, Risk and Scrutiny did an excellent piece of work around that. The issues we need to do is that and the compliance, enforcement and other issues to take us forward. So that's really what's recommended. Again, many of the issues Richard refers to in procurement were already in the service, and it's been the problem is the compliance with that, where the major issue arose. But certainly there was a major report, and certainly reports came to both council and Policy Resources, Economic Resources Pro-Council in relation to this, and it's within to take it forward. So in fact it is a further look at it, and a further lessons learned, particularly around regulatory compliance and compliance with council's policies that need to be enforced in the council from this point on, and actually another look at them just to check that they absolutely are in compliance with best practice. But certainly it was an intensive and comprehensive piece of work.
Thank you, Leader. Just to add and to reiterate that my investigation absolutely evidenced a significant improvement in terms of the policies and procedures that underpin procurement arrangements within the council. They have significantly been improved. As I said before, they require services and managers to follow those. An example of that again sort of came out of the investigation for members' information specific to this investigation was that this contract was based on a seeker form of subcontract, which is a national industry standard set of terms and conditions. When I interviewed the officers specific to this contract, they did not have a copy of that set of terms and conditions. So we'd applied a contract set on national terms, but we didn't have a contract of those seeker terms and conditions within the service. So I think my comment would be you can have as much policy procedures in place, but it's up to the managers and the services that are responsible to ensure that they comply with those policies and procedures.
That would really be the subject of the review that we're proposing, is actually why are these things not being complied with. The procedures are there, but they're not being adhered to. What more has to be done to ensure that they're followed? Councillor James, do you
well, only to thank you for the replies. I mean, I think we can have all the best procedures we want, but if we're just trying to do simply far too much with less resources all the time, continual mission creep, we're going to run into trouble. And being a sort of large entrepreneur doing a vast range of different services was never something we should have touched, along with many things that we get into. We should reduce to the core and get it right.
And I think that's partly what transformation is all about. It's trying to make sure that we do what we need to do, we do it as well as we possibly can. Councillor Dougie Campbell.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I'd like to thank Richard for his report and the investigation at Appendix 1. It's a huge piece of work, and it couldn't have been a very enjoyable experience, particularly bearing in mind what we've been through over the last 3 months with COVID-19. Richard, probably the most alarming part of your report for me was the first paragraph, where you talk about the culture within DG First, and I know from past professional experience that trying to reset culture, it can be an incredibly difficult thing to do, but also more worryingly, and I think it's something for us all to consider, is that it can permeate through an organisation, and it doesn't always exist within one area of that organisation. And I'm curious about how you're articulating culture, Richard. Are we talking about failure to follow policy, risk assessment audits? Is it an issue around capability, or is it about a flagrant disregard for council policy and practice, or is it a combination of all of those? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the culture issue. I don't expect you to answer in relation to the whole organisation, but if you could expand in regards to DG First. And a sort of further question, I think Councillor Wilson sort of touched on it earlier, in terms of HR processes. As part of your investigation, did you actually look in any detail at the HR processes in terms of matching and recruitment, including internal recruitment, looking at essential and desirable skills, professional qualifications, I think if this hasn't been looked at in any detail, I think it's something that we should do, because there's a possibility that as an organisation we've put people in place in very important roles where they haven't had the capability to actually fulfil those roles to the standards that we expect. Thank you.
Thank
you, Councillor Campbell. Certainly, in terms of culture, I think what I mean by that is that when I interviewed a number of colleagues involved in the delivery of these services, that there was a real perception that they needed to operate with fleet of foot. They needed to operate in a different environment in order to successfully be commercial, and in many ways a local authority with its potentially bureaucratic systems and procedures hindered the ability to operate in that commercial market. And as a consequence, I think the arm's length operation endeavoured to work within the exterior of that, so to speak, in order to be commercial and in order to operate in the way that it was challenged to do. In terms of HR processes, no, Councillor Campbell, I didn't look at internal recruitment policies, processes, procedures. I didn't consider that to be specifically within the remit that I was presented with, but understand the question.
Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. It's just to reiterate the point. I think it would be important that we do actually look at this in terms of individuals and the key post holders, because there may be issues there that we haven't uncovered as yet in terms of suitability for particular posts.
Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Leader. I think it would be remiss of me not to reflect the public fury that is out there about this particular problem. They see gross incompetence. Now, whether that's fair or not, it's not really the point. What's coming forward to us is that we see gross incompetence evidenced by what has happened with these contracts, and particularly in terms of operationally by officers in DG First, which thankfully no longer exists. They object to the fact that nearly £3 million has disappeared from public finances, and the opportunity cost of that. I can think of lots of things I would have preferred to have spent £3 million on, and I sympathise very much. I don't often actually get emails about things like this from the public, but I have had emails, and they are angry, and justifiably so. I look at the composition of the integrity group, the council's integrity group, and I don't know whether officers would care to comment on this, but there's been a hole, a vast hole in all of this. I see a hole in terms of the support to the council, in terms of legality. I don't know whether anybody actually checked on the legality of these contracts, whether our systems were there and available to check on them, to make certain that we were performing absolutely to the strictures of the non-contract, as it turns out. I also think that I would like to think about where internal audit had been in all of this. I know that in 2008 they wrote a very succinct paper, clear warnings given about contracts in 2008. Because I looked up on SharePoint last night and knew I'd seen one somewhere. There were really clear warnings given on flaws in our procurement, and that was only just before, maybe a year or so, before the contracts were entered into, the second contract was entered into with Amy. And you would think that the council officers involved in contracts might really be thinking in a quite worried way about whether or not they were performing or not. And I finally come through to the head of paid service, who is responsible for those corporate systems, making certain that public money was safe and being properly guarded. And I don't think in any shape or form that we can say that that has happened here. Individual members have complained regularly. There's been a feeling that there was something wrong with DG First, but could we get at it? No, we couldn't. But you would think that the officers might pick up the fact that members really were concerned. They knew there was something wrong, and we did not either have the skills amongst ourselves or the systems, corporate systems, to permit us to get into the problems that were clearly there. How could we roll forward 5 years of accruals without somebody saying, gosh, there's something wrong here, guys, there's something the matter. So I have to get back. I mean, the head of paid service, chief executive, has said that compliance and performance with our systems were the major issues and fallback here. And I have to say, I think you're absolutely right.
You want to respond to Jane's point? Coming in a fair period of time when things have been going on.
I think to say that absolutely accept the points Councillor makes about the anger and the failure of the internal control system to identify it. I would point out that audit risk and scrutiny have the ability to call anything, and if we wish it, that needs to be far clearer and laid down. So this was not a member issue, this was a compliance issue by officers. That led to this. On the accruals issue, that's part of the work that Richard's referred to around understanding it. That's where we need the forensic accounting. And the clear issue is, was this a rolling accruals issue? But certainly members agreed that we would write off amounts in 2015-16, or was it an end of contract accruals issue? And that's really where I think the forensic work is needed to understand that, and that will move it either from issues of, was this a competence issue or was it another issue related to that? But absolutely, there is something that perhaps in members' recommendations about the need for a separate and beefed up regulatory and compliance unit within the council, perhaps directly reporting into the audit and scrutiny committee to provide that absolute assurance that is there absolute compliance around the range of policies and procedures that certain members will be considered. But certainly I absolutely accept that I do live in Dumfries and I do understand the rightful anger in relation to this just now. But at this point, as I said, the answer to the questions that were posed earlier will lie in the findings of the forensic auditors into the relation of that accrual.
Content with the response?
We're going to get an opportunity, I think, to pick this over very carefully soon.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Leader. Again, I highlighted the opening statements about culture in the organisation. I find it, frankly, quite incredible that basically a rogue part of the organisation was just basically allowed to run free, which brings me back to the overall culture of the organisation as a laissez-faire approach to controlling these sort of issues? Or are we just waiting bad news to come and bite us and then we react to it rather than be proactive? And from any form of accounting practice, to continually reaccrue it's bad practice. Now, Councillor Maitland has just said the public's angry. Well, actually, as a member who sat on the Enterprise and Services Committee, the EEI Committee, we were presented with information. We talk about presentation here. The information on which we were making decisions, it was nothing to do with presentation. I think somebody needs to be looking at the content. Because what's happened here is we've been presented with sets of figures which we got told repeatedly, meeting after meeting, budget pressures on the road service, budget pressure on the road service. We had no information to tell us that the situation was far worse than it appeared on paper, due to what is at best dubious accounting practices as far as I can see. And what's happened with that is trust's gone. It takes a long time to build up trust. It takes a moment to lose it. And this report, for me, is that moment. And how are we going to rebuild trust and faith in the figures?
I can always say on the scrutiny side of it, I think there is an issue about the sorts of the information that councillors need in order to be properly scrutinised what they're being presented with, and the sort of independent resource that can flag up the fact that there might be something wrong, because you're right, people were continually told that everything was fine, and this was held up. Actually, the enterprising council, people at APSI, strongly promoting the enterprising council. This was the way council should go. You should be out there making money and helping to support the council functions, keeping people in employment. And it was very much, before my time on the council, but it was very much an in thing for councils to do. I think, to a certain extent, I don't think, and I'm not saying this because I wasn't there at the time, but I don't think the council can be criticised for wanting to do that, because it was very much the way of what councillors were supposed to be doing at the time. But I think there is something about what training do maybe councillors need to be able to properly scrutinise things. What about the papers we're presented with? When I was in the Parliament, I was always astonished by the fact Jen and I would be reading our papers at the weekend. Jen would have a pile of papers like this, about 900 pages of papers to read, and I'd have 30. To do a conclusion within the Parliament. Our members being overloaded with information, so they can't basically see the wood for the trees. And it's a technique of confusing people. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done about it, both our training and the information that we're given, so that we can properly scrutinise things and ask the right questions. As Jane says, people were saying that councillors were sensing that something was wrong, but they weren't able to put their finger on what it was.
Well, the thing, going back through the previous meetings, this has just came out of the blue, and shock horror probe, council's made a big loss. It was only in September 17, they were still talking at Enterprises Subcommittee about extending the 4G contract. Now, surely, by that point, after we've written off over £500,000 of debt, and we've rolled over accruals year after year, somebody should have been asking questions.
I think absolutely, I agree with Councillor Johnson. It was the 4G contract, and members need to remember when they entered into the 4G contract at the back of 2 successful 2 and 3 contracts. I think not recognising the contract base was different. It was a fundamental mistake. And again, I think perhaps, Leader, it's not too much information was presented in relation to this. I think far too little information was presented in relation to this. The fact that Richard identifies that only, I think, in about 4 reports was the contract specifically mentioned. That the trading account was mentioned, and members were given chapter and verse, sometimes the trading account, not the actual nature of the biggest contract that existed within it. I think the issue of training is a very good one the members have made, and I think actually perhaps an issue is on the level of scrutiny members will be permitted to take and supported to take around the accounts, where obviously this problem was included, the ability to scrutinise those amounts and accruals being put in advance of the final sign-off of the accounts. Maybe, and again, that, considering your recommendations, is something we could work on with members to provide more information and support they might need. Even down to the point to report trust and confidence. Obviously, Parliament has independent advisors that are able to advise into committees. Perhaps the scrutiny committee with an independent advisor could something members would to help restore that trust and confidence and support. Because you can train members all the way, but unless you actually have a trained accountant, it's really difficult to fully understand the question. So that all those ideas will be taken forward. But I think Malcolm, Councillor Johnson, absolutely hit the nail on the head. And it's about that fullest understanding of what was in those numbers. And again, I think with the forensic work back to members, that will reveal. And actually, speaking to Transfer, they'd only just started at the start, so they didn't have systems at the beginning. So again, it was a new organisation engaging. So again, that should have brought us an alert in those early days. But the nature of the work that roads undertake, the level of accrual around a couple of million wouldn't have been unusual. I think, given the fact that much of the work was done in that last winter period, coming into the end of March close down. And so again, I think it was the accrual that went with about 4 million in the last year, again, is a specific focus I would point members to for that forensic work, as to revealing and how much of that would have been early years and how much actually was new stuff that was in that accrual. I think both Councillor Maitland and Councillor Johnson have expressed fully the rightful anger both of the public and members, and particularly those that sat in the committee.
And Councillor Sean Marshall.
Thanks, Chair. Could I turn to the investigation report at Appendix 1, and then specific 3.16, where it states, the findings of this investigation indicate that the financial and risk management controls in relation to this contract were not fit for purpose. Oversight should have also been provided by the DG First Management Committee, which I take it was back in 2013 when they entered into the 4D contract. However, the committee did not receive or ask for information from senior management to allow it to scrutinise the contract. My first question is, at what level of detail would you expect a committee to scrutinise a contract when we have procurement, legal, financial and commercial professionals within the council? That's my first question. The second one is, how much information that has been uncovered in the investigation would you have expected to have come before the council in normal council operations? And my third point is, it says in the investigation that Richard interviewed 15 members of staff. I do notice though that there was no councillors invited to be interviewed. And certainly from my perspective, as chair of Enterprise and DG from 2017 and 18, I would have expected to have been approached along with a number of other councillors. So I hope that we're now entering into an inquiry, and I would hope that myself and other councillors would be invited to actually give their views and attempts to try and establish answers, because I did that both in and out of committee, and the information that I got was unsatisfactory. So could I have those issues, please?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Marshall. I'm going to pick up the last one first, if I may, because that was an issue that I did consider and sought HR advice in that regard. In undertaking the investigation, I ensured that it was carried out in accordance with the Council's investigation policy and supporting guidance and toolkit. The guidance is very clear in that individuals employed by the council can and have been interviewed who could provide information to assist the investigation. But it's not within the guidance, nor is it custom and practice to interview elected members within that process. So I was very keen and very mindful that I complied with policy, procedure and best practice in that regard. I think, just to follow on from that, Councillor Marshall, that in terms of the investigation itself and the answers to the questions that I received from the individuals that I interviewed were pretty consistent in terms of the information that I sought, particularly in terms of members' roles and responsibilities. So again, I didn't want to go above and beyond what I was given as custom and practice and guidance by HR. In terms of the delegations, I looked at that in quite some detail. In terms of the delegations to the DG First Management Committee and the reports that went before both that committee and full council in regard to delegations, particularly in terms of the authority for performance, competitiveness and financial frameworks under which DG First would operate, and that was requested by the Management Committee in June 2011. And they agreed that before entering into contract, approval must be sought where the potential value is in excess of $250,000 and where the client does not conform to the definitions detailed within the DG First competitive framework. So leading from that, the authority to bid to the contract was perceived to be included and detailed within that context. But there was no formal paper that was taken to committee for a decision giving authority for the DG First to enter into the contract with Transfer Serve specifically, but it was within those delegations. The committee was given assurances at that point in terms of business continuity, and workforce particularly, I think, was a key issue throughout the decision-making process around entering into this contract. But there was a requirement from the committee of officers to provide operational updates on an ongoing basis, but it doesn't appear that any such updates were taken to committee over and above verbal updates.
And again,
can I just come back?
Marshall,
yeah.
If I can add on actually the Council Marshall, if you remember when Enterprising Services was set up, this issue was directly addressed, and I can't remember if it was your request or a request of an opposition members at the time, that the ability for Enterprising Services to enter contracts was formally constrained, that they had to come back beyond a certain level, and I think it was something like £200,000, 2 members with a full risk assessment, business case, profit and financial reporting template. Members, I think, agreed that at its first meeting with the support of the commercial plan. So in fact, what's surprising is that in 2011, similar delegations existed, but actually wasn't complied with at that time. But actually in Enterprising Services, those arrangements were absolutely insisted on by members. And I remember there was a debate about the level, threshold and tolerance, whether or not it was going to be 250,000 or below. So that was constrained, and that also aligned to the improvements in procurement that were also put in members' assistance. So again, this contract could not have been entered into without a formal approval to tender by Enterprising Services at the time and now by Council, and an agreement of a risk assessment as well before the tender could have been put in. What members were informed in Richard's report in the 2011 end of contract was just we have entered the contract. So again, I think that to give that assurance that the arrangements that existed for Enterprising Services under the Council, any contract of this size would have to come before members with that level of detail as was set out in the commercial plan. So just with that assurance, that already exists, and we'll also further look at that following member scrutinies, whether or not further improvements tightening can be made, particularly about regular compliance checks, perhaps their scrutiny process back to members on the compliance.
John, do you want that?
Yeah, it was just, with regards to the inquiry, is it in the intention to involve councillors in interviews if deemed necessary?
I would caution against an inquiry. I think in the lessons moving forward, given the fact that we are not sure where we might go at the end until the final forensic work's done in relation to that, I think interviewing members who might be involved in decision-making processes, either as part of a committee or full council, would be dangerous, but certainly getting members' views and experience on what actually happened so that we can bring reports back to solve it would certainly be acceptable, but I'd caution members of being involved in an inquiry until any subsequent action has been completed, Councillor Marshall. That part actually involved bringing that experience and comments into reports that members need of the improvements subject to the recommendations today, absolutely.
Can I come in at the same point? Very, very briefly. Now, I was interviewed as part of the DG1 inquiry and I thought it was fundamental and really important. I think it's important that all members from DG First right through enterprise services to the chairs of the economy, environment, infrastructures past and present should be interviewed. I'd be interviewed. But as I'm hearing this discussion unrolling, there's a lot of information in my mind that I'm reflecting going back to 2012. I feel like putting out today, but as part of an interview process and inquiry, we should certainly, members should have an involvement, and I support Sean this entirely, that should, the members should be listened to with this.
I think, sorry, but all I'm saying is absolutely, I think we will engage members, but I think it's to separate the work of the inquiry and potentially internal disciplinary procedures from that information involvement of members. It may well feed in at a later date to other processes, but certainly if that's the will of members, the wish of members, absolutely I will take that forward. I think we'll just take advice, the best way to do it. That's all I'm saying, Councillor. There's not just not to say that they're going to be part of the inquiry, because I think that's what there's way to do it, and certainly to seek the experience and opinion of members on this, absolutely involved.
I think if we want to understand what went wrong, we actually need to understand what information was given to members. I'm Councillor Crothers as well. I was interviewed about DG1 as well. I was able to tell them, I've been around for a while. I wasn't really able to give an awful lot of helpful information, but I think that experience of members, and Jane referred to it as well, about all that period of time when members knew that something wasn't quite right, but they weren't able to find out what it was. I think that's valuable part of it as well.
I'll engage with members on the best way. Perhaps if someone independent did it, it would allow members that ability to expand. So I'll engage with perhaps good leaders on this meeting on the best way to do that forward.
Hopefully we'll agree that through the recommendations.
Councillor Sloan.
Yeah, sure. I'm really surprised when I hear them talk about this being a report that seeks the truth on this issue. Because if there's truth in here, I can't find it. I know there's nothing in here that I haven't known for 2 years now. There's nothing any member hasn't known for 2 years. There's nothing new here whatsoever. I mean, who is period of action taken against on this issue? A lot of public money has been wasted, not just this issue. There's a lot of other issues within this council, within the same department, where this has happened. So you've got to ask yourself, who's responsible? I've read the paper, and I can't. I've listened to the debate for an hour and a half without being able to get into the debate. I may say during that time, I've listened to officers talk at great length. I've listened to members say they think it's a disgrace that this has happened, but I still don't know what we're going to do about it. And it must be something punitive to take care of actually a so it doesn't happen again. Thank you very much.
Can I just reassure you, Tommy, that we had a long list of people, and I'm working through the list of speakers. It's thanks for your patience and waiting to get in, and to everybody else who's on the list, but we do have a lot of people wanting to speak. Councillor Stitt.
Cheers, Leader. I've just got a simple basic question. Can we get absolute assurance that we don't end up with a situation like this again?
Subject, I mean, I'm looking for the director, but subject to the work that members will commission following this meeting, that absolute assurance that all recommendations that come from the members will be fully implemented, and I'm pretty sure members will also be requesting absolute confirmation of the assurance mechanisms that will underpin those policies and procedure amendments they wish to put in. Again, I would have to say that it would not be possible to enter a contract like this currently without full member scrutiny in advance. So therefore, I think that does not say that the internal controls have yet been subject to that member consideration yet. So, this scale, perhaps not, but again, that's why members, following the recommendations today, that will be decided upon when members see the result of that work.
Councillor Brodie.
Good morning, Leader. Yeah, I think councillors should contribute to the investigation of reform, because councillors are being criticised for not scrutinising what's happening in the council, and also there's a question of whether we've been misled for the last number of years. I've been questioning myself, what could councillors have done more to avoid this? I say we've done quite a lot. In the last term of the council, the scrutiny committee did an extensive piece of work on contracts, subcontracts, procurement, commissioning, and we took evidence from a number of officers and contractors, including DG first, and we were given assurances about the procedures were in place, robust procedures in place for subcontracts, and I think we need to look at what happened at that scrutiny committee and the notes and see whether members were misled then, because they certainly asked lots of questions about external contracts, and I think that's something that should be looked at very closely. And I think we also, when the DG Enterprise business plan came to the E&I committee, we lambasted it because it was a terrible document. The figures were just plucked out of there. There was no rationale behind it. And I think that should have been sent alarm bells ringing amongst all our senior leaders within the council, the corporate management team. It should have been raised a lot of alarms. Yeah, I would appreciate Richard Grieveson's comprehensive report, but there's only so far that you can investigate yourself. So I hate to say it, because we've had a number of these before. We need an external view of that and how we could act better as a corporate council. Thank you.
Hello? Right. First of all, I would like to thank Richard for a very sincere and honest report. And I sent him approximately 20 question points for him to respond to, which he's assured me he will. And I'm happy for him to share those with other elected members in the hope that this will save time. But I am concerned about the fact that internal auditors and external auditors do not seem to have been able to pick this up. I'm also very concerned and need to know who actually enforces policy and things within this council. My confidence in the chief exec is at an all-time low, and I would very much like to hear from him how he's going to build my confidence in the future, because we are looking at a lot of large projects in the future with borderlands, with possibly the White Sands flood defences, with phase 2 of schools, and the last thing I want is another car crash, because at present we are already experiencing a multi-pile-up.
Thanks, Councillor Wood, for that. I think the answer to that is it was coming in the shape of support of the recommendations the members are going to bring forward. But it's about the greater scrutiny in advance of committing to those contracts and projects at the front end by members, to ensure that before tenders are submitted, that members are comfortable and competent both in the risks associated with tender and the potential cost and contingency. I think the contingency issue is the big one as we enter contracts. But actually it's about that level of scrutiny and the ability of members to call in the middle of contracts if they feel that something is going wrong and to be supported to undertake that work. And again, if the capital programme, you see that one of the first things that was agreed last week was the establishment of the ability to have the development costs and teams put forward in advance of bringing proposals forward, and that clarity for members, that capacity will be there. I think it's in the process of engagement and decision by members in advance of tenders going in, and then consideration of the result of those tenders at the back end. So I think it's the tightening up of that member scrutiny and the provision of the appropriate information that members would need to take the decision that will be needed that will help build back confidence in corporate council. Whether or not bring back confidence in myself is a matter for the member.
Andrew, come back.
Come back in. It's really, I still haven't had an answer as to who enforces policy and the proceedings within this council. And furthermore, is we're spending thousands of pounds on both internal and external auditors, and I feel extremely let down by their policies and proceedings.
I think members quite rightly set policy and have a scheme of delegation in which that is then delegated into officers, into service directors, and responsibility associated with those delegations is clearly laid out. As to enforcement, again, the internal control system, of which internal audit is only one part. There's the independent monitoring officer access to members, the section 95 officer aspect to members, external audits, direct access to members of this council is in existence. Obviously, the external audit process is not there to give absolute assurance. However, I think given the fact it was two of the largest firms in Britain that were our auditors, I think reinforces Mr. Grieveson's points about the complexity that sits within the numbers here. And that's why it's needing forensic audit. Many of the cases, if I'm putting it simply, if you're provided with supporting document that says we have incurred costs, it's quite a difficult thing to go to them because it's a very complex contract to work out whether or not get paid. And actually a lot of this would relate to costs that are going to subsequently be irrecoverable. So again, there's something perhaps in the audit process now in the risk assessment to perhaps invest more time in tracing right back through the absolute detail of the contract, but it's not a standard audit test that you would do if you have a valid invoice saying that this cost has to be paid. To go to the fullness of actually the intricacies of a contract. However, that's not an excuse, but they are not there to be our internal control system. The weakness is laid within our internal control system, but actually in perhaps the assurances and judgments within the service, which again, I've heard several times today that members saw and received those assurances. So again, those are factors that moving from here, we will need to consider, and certainly in light of the work that's been undertaken through the forensic audit.
Councillor Scobie.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at, we have a motion before us, and no doubt we'll have an amendment coming forward. And that, in my opinion, there'll be a bun fight as to who's going to carry out this review, either of what happened or a root and branch review carried out by whatever committee, whether it be finance, procurement, or audit and risk. But then I returned to the report, and Tommy spoke of, whether there's much truth coming out from the report. And earlier, we heard from Ian Carruthers talking about, or asking the question on, was information withheld or officials misled? And I think I heard the answer to that, or part of the answer to that, saying that investigations had not confirmed, which puts a great deal of doubt in my mind. And the doubt is, and it's particularly, then we heard from Sean on page, or rather 3.16, where it refers to the committee did not receive or ask for information from senior management to allow it to scrutinise the contract. And when I look at that, if members are sitting with information, and as Sean has rightly asked or made reference to 3.16, how culpable are the members in this whole affair in terms of the scrutiny, asking questions or not asking questions to some of the references, or if they're sitting with information that would lead members to believe there is something else in this? And again, I look at the independence of the council in what we've got so far. And I think back to a year and maybe more ago, when this first came up, when it came to light, that there was this shortcomings and so forth, or this huge hole of money in it. And it was then said that we would have an independent to begin with, and if it needed, we would go for an external. And we know at that stage now where we need to go external, irrespective of this motion or an amendment, fighting it out as to who's going to conduct what should have been a scope that we had already agreed. Now we're coming back to do another scope for another review and another year. I think this is kicking it into the long grass and everything else to try and cover something. I think we need to get to the truth, and as Tommy rightly said, who is responsible for it, and if members are culpable in the whole affair. That's what we need to look at, and for people to be held to account for what has happened. Thank you.
Heather Scobie, who are you suggesting does the review? If you don't think either audit risk and scrutiny or communities are the appropriate mechanism, who do you think should be doing it?
Chair, if you're asking me and you're accepting that as a motion that goes forward, then I think we're going to look at who is the best person to carry out an external investigation, inquiry, call it as you will, so that we do get to the truth. And if that's what you know, if you're saying because, by asking the question that you'll accept that, then we can conclude the meeting just now.
Councillor Scobie, I'm saying you disagree that it should be either audit risk or scrutiny or the communities committee to undertake a review. So
I'm saying that a year ago it was to be an internal investigation. That year has now lapsed, and after that we would then look at an external investigation. I think we're at that stage, and that's what I'm saying. So if you accept that, well, I'm sure we can conclude on that.
I'm not accepting anything actually at the moment. I'm just clarifying what you are disagreeing with, okay, and what your alternative would be.
I'm saying that we're going to have a bun fight on a motion and an amendment on what committee is going to carry out and what the scope of the review is. We've already spent a year on it, and what I'm saying is it's maybe about time we were looking at an external investigation, inquiry, call it as you will.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. I think to be absolutely clear, the work that's fundamental to this is absolutely being done externally, which is the nature of the accounting transactions, and that will then lead to the assurances that members were provided to, because from that evidence will come what was known at the time. Once we get that, I think obviously the members believe that Richard has not done a comprehensive piece of work and wish the work to be redone externally. However, the work will be subject, of course, to very great interest from an external auditor, so I'm pretty sure we'll want to do assurance work around the work that we're undertaking. And I'd have to challenge the point, are members culpable? At no point, I think, in Richard's report did we say that members were culpable in this. In fact, improvements needed to allow members to exercise their role better. I think that's absolutely clear, but I wouldn't want members of the public in this public meeting to anticipate that any time in the report do we believe that members were culpable. I think that it is subject to officers, senior officers in this council to ensure members are provided with information that they require to take those decisions. So I would temper the fact that members were culpable. the ability of whichever committee members decide to do it can be, it's obviously up to the committee to seek what advice it would wish to support its decision-making processes. It is open to this council to seek that internally, or as I referred before, some external support. And certainly I know that the audit scrutiny looking at the procurement subcontracts was provided with additional support to be able to do that. So I think that's, you know, for members' decision this afternoon. But certainly be assured that the fundamental evidence in this final stage is actually being done independently and external to the council.
I don't know if I'm reassured by what Gavin just said there, because the question was asked of Sean, or Sean asked the question rather, and it's on 3.16. And it's clear that the county did not receive or ask for the information. And that was a question asked by Sean. So that's where the culpability may come in. And the further culpability would come in for me is if members are sitting with information that would lead the members here or the members of the council to come to a different conclusion. When he asked the question about information being withheld or officers being misled, if there's information there that members are sitting on, then that question, you know, on culpability needs to come forward. And my reference is we're going to have a bun fight on who's going to carry out the review, whether it be root and branch or a further year to do a more investigation, when the independence has to be looked at and whether it should be an external investigation or inquiry. That's my point, and I'm pleased to hear, Gavin, that you think that we are not culpable.
Councillor Wilson.
My question's been asked.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Section 2.6, and what was a very good report from Richard, brings me great concerns. I'll read out a bit of it. The council spent over £23 million with suppliers and subcontractors. There was no competitive tendering. Now, that seems to suggest there was a great deal of informality about the awarding of contracts. And I suppose I've got a vision out in my head of enterprising services contacting a subcontractor and saying, hello, it's us again. Could you resurface this bit of road for us for, say, 50,000? And I think the whole process, in a way, makes one think that there could indeed be an opportunity for the council to show favouritism towards certain subcontractors. So can I ask, and perhaps I'm not allowed to ask, but I'll ask anyway, which 3 or 4 subcontractors were most used by the council? Could you name them? And out of the £23 million, how much of that money was spent with these 3 or 4 subcontractors?
I don't know how much of that is commercially sensitive.
I don't think anything is at the absolutely. We will be able to provide that information to elected members out at the meeting, but I would not want to mention individual companies in a public meeting. But absolutely, we'll make that information available to yourself and all members.
I think it's an important piece of information. John, are you satisfied with that?
Obviously, I'm not satisfied because I haven't been answered, but I look forward to receiving that information. I appreciate that, Leader. Thank you.
Councillor Charters.
John. Yes, my concern about this follows very much what Willie Scobie was talking about an external investigation. So clearly the internal investigations have proved useless. And we're no further forward in 2 years than we are at the moment. We're proposing to have yet another internal one, but it simply won't work. Because what we should be investigating is fraud. And this word simply has not come up in any of these papers at all, that there is a possibility of a large fraud being perpetrated on this council, running into millions of pounds, which can't be found. And I think that if we made this a fraud investigation and handed it over to the police, we would then get an external auditor onto it, with perhaps prosecutions which would deter the fraudulent in the future. So my recommendation is that we don't worry about incompetence. It's clearly that most of these people are incompetent. We can see that. And what they should have done is brought in councillors who've got the real authority to investigate it. But we see that 15 people were lined up and produced nothing. Incompetence is not part of it. It is fraud, and it's largely, as I can see it, a fraud on the use of accruals. Year after year, the same accruals being used to balance the books. And that is absolutely not legal as far as auditing accounts is concerned. We need to go back from incompetence, because it's there, everybody knows it. We need to look at whether these actions were fraudulent and whether we should refer them to the police and make the police be the external judge of whether there's been a major fraud on this council.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Charteris. I can assure all members that at the point where this investigation progressing, it was quite clear to me that there was a possibility of fraud, and that's why on that basis the integrity group were alerted to the situation. Therefore, I would emphasise Appendix 2 to your report, Councillor Charteris, sets that out very clearly, that we are exploring the possibility of fraud and the police are being kept appraised of development. So absolutely assure you on 2 counts, the possibility of fraud is being fully considered, and our external, I stress external assistance from the forensic accountancy will be a key player in addressing those issues. Thank you.
That's I don't.
I'm not satisfied with that.
Waste of
I'm
time.
not satisfied with that answer, because fraud cannot be investigated internally. Fraud is a criminal offence and needs to be investigated by the police. There's no point putting us another council committee together to investigate this. We need people to be absolutely hung out to dry if they've been committing a fraud with public money on our work. It brings us into disrepute right across Dumfries and Galloway. And we want to do the best for those people we represent, not the worst. So I'm afraid your assurances simply fall on my deaf ear.
Councillor Charles, it has been reported to the police. The police have been informed about this. I don't hope that would reassure you, the fact that the police have been informed. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Leader. I mean, most of the questions I've asked.
Can I ask everybody to switch their audios off, particularly if you're in the same room as somebody with a computer that they're probably listen. Stephen, can you speak up a bit? I think people are not hearing.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Having listened to the various questions and answers from officers and the Chief Executive, I think we have to be careful about the recommendations we make going forward, because there's a number of things which might need to be set out very clearly. So compliance seems to be a very strong theme, in that we could have all the scrutiny and procedures in the world, we could have loads of reviews and recommend various things to the council, but if there's no compliance, it doesn't work. So firstly, who's responsible within the council or elected members for ensuring compliance? And is that something that we can actually competently stray into? Or are we in a position where we can seek assurance on compliance and then set a measure or indicator that measures that and then monitor that? And this is, I'm really asking this because I don't know, and I would like the advice of the Chief Executive or the relevant officer to say, can we competently do that? Or is that the job of a manager? Or is that the job of the Chief Exec? Or is that the job of the council as a whole? Or is that the job of a committee or a panel or whatever it might be. I think whatever recommendations we go forward with needs to set that out clearly, so that we're not trying to do the chief exec's job, and a manager's not trying to do a councillor's job, and et cetera, et cetera. So I would really want to be clear in whatever recommendations we end up agreeing today, that we get that proper advice from the proper officers or the chief exec, because we might sound as if we're going to do something really meaningful, but it'll end up being the same old, we'll still have no assurance that we'll get compliance, because that's not our job, I suspect. That's the manager's job to get that in staff. We need to set the policy and scrutinise the performance. So I think we have to be very careful about what we agree going forward. But clearly, I mean, it's an awful mess, this, and it's another one. And no matter how many reviews we have, we don't seem to quite catch everything in the net. So we've got scrutiny, performance, compliance, and oversight, and yet we've not managed to put them together in a way that's properly protected us. And I'm just really concerned, and I think we have to take very much care about how we engage this going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. That's a very pertinent question. I think there's two aspects to it. I would say for members' consideration. One is the approach to the risk plan. Commonly called an internal audit plan. Perhaps it's an internal control plan that is subject to scrutiny by audit, risk and scrutiny, and which can set out the areas of risk and what the members wish undertaken in relation to that independent checking process to give you the assurance of internal controls. And perhaps there's something around for each of the service committees having around those key indicators of financial risk, the how do you know question. How do you know that that's right? So providing assurance to the service committees that we've done a sample check of 20, we've done a sample check of, we're drawing in from those systems. It's absolutely transparent to the members what underpins that assurance that members are being received, so that members are then able to set those compliance levels. We would list a test of 50 to support that recommendation. Again, that could be part of the discussion with members about how do you know that assurance that you're giving us. It would be something that we formalise into the ability for members to scrutinise, so they're not just told this is it, this is what we're doing, but actually there is a built-in process of giving assurance and telling you how and where that assurance has come from. And again, I think that would be something, but I think the first one would be perhaps the audit risk and scrutiny, perhaps to be presented with a wider plan around the internal control framework and directing into areas of risk advised by the chief internal audit post, or however that goes forward for the members' consideration. But then I think each service committee having that extra level of how do you know, and hope that to give you that assurance is where those numbers and how they know those numbers are right, they're coming forward to members. I think you could easily build that in, subject to debate with members, into the recovery plans coming forward in September.
Can I just, the key point I wanted to really get there, and I kind of lost it along the way somewhere, was the compliance. So if we say we want to know that officers comply with the policies and the standing orders, whatever we put in place for procurement, whatever it might be, and they don't, or somebody doesn't, for whatever reason, who then acts on that lack of compliance? Because that's what hasn't happened. That's why we're looking at this report, because we had, arguably, we had protocols and procedures, but they weren't compliant. People weren't compliant with them, and that's evident, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So who, and is it elected members, or is it a member of staff, or whatever, who takes action when somebody doesn't comply? Because we can see it, say, there's a performance issue there because we've not got compliance. Who then specifically addresses that and deals with it? Because I don't think it's us as elected members. I think we see it and call it, but somebody else then has to actually do something. So who's meant to have been doing that, and who should be doing that in the future? I think that's where we want to get to.
And I agree, and I think the current situation would be, particularly in finance, the compliance issue would be the Section 95 officer, and the actual director responsible for ensuring that compliance would be Ron me and currently sitting in finance function, but also individual directors depending on the nature of the compliance issue. But certainly we come through that process. There's a legal compliance issue, the reporting from the monitoring officer. And I think Councillor Thompson, as I was suggesting, perhaps members considering how that regulatory function is pulled together in the council to provide that assurance is something that perhaps I think the director is already considering, but I won't speak for Derek.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Fundamentally, as the council operates through a scheme of delegation, both to officers and members, and in relation to that compliance, the responsibility firmly sits with officers of the council. What is clear is that we have a requirement now, to, as the Chief Executive has said earlier, is to review the council's governance arrangements, and on that basis there's clearly also the opportunity to review the delegations both to officers and to committees, and that will be something that will come forward in the coming reports that we referred to earlier. So quite clearly, delegation sets out who's responsible, and in this regard, as the Chief Executive said, it's officers, and that very much starts at the highest level with directors of the relevant service.
Thank you.
Can I just make a small point? Very, very small. This is not being political or anything like that, but the opposition of this council did point out to me in 2017 that the split the Audit and Risk Management Committee and the Scrutiny and Performance Committee can join them actually, no split them. You said there's a risks there attached to that. The two committees used to meet, I think, something 18 or 19 times a year. That reduced to about 5. I still think there's risks attached to that. Maybe we can address that as the month goes on.
Thanks, Marshall.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on a point of clarification on some of the issues that Councillor Scobie raised. Back at the start of the meeting, when Richard presented his findings under the investigation, and due to the questions that were asked, Richard has confirmed that the forthcoming inquiry will be undertaken by an independent external group or organisation. And my understanding, when that is done, then it will come back to the relevant committees and members of this council to scrutinise, and then the finding from that, if some of them are required to go to the police because of fraud, then that will happen. Is that my understanding?
Thanks, Leader. Just again, in terms of Appendix 2, the further inquiry work that is ongoing thus far includes that independent financial analysis to the council. So that's ongoing as we speak in terms of that further inquiry work as detailed at Appendix 2.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Leader. I want to pick up on Councillor Thompson's point, and I think also link it to the contributions made by Councillor Maitland and Councillor Johnson as well, which I fundamentally agreed with, and I believe were very well expressed. I think it'd be difficult to state sufficiently clearly without running the risk of breaching various parts of the Code of Conduct the level of disappointment and outrage that there is over this, both professionally and, quite frankly, personally. I think the people who have been here long enough are entitled to feel greatly let down by this matter, greatly let down by it. The point in 1.4, the review, whichever committee reviews it, which I think Councillor Thompson was particularly alluding to in terms of assurances that our procedures and standing orders are complied with, I think directly relates to the point that the previous speakers very eloquently made about the extent to which trust has been damaged. And I would sum it up as this: officers are delegated to exercise authority on our behalf. They're delegated by us to do it, and it is our authority that they exercise in line with those procedures and policies. The fact that this has gone so drastically wrong, even though it is now an historical document and an event in the past, the implications that has had, which are very clearly reflected by basically every member that has spoken on this matter today, it is that in my view, makes it essential that we as members are satisfied that officers who exercise delegated authority, which is ours, fundamentally and first and foremost, are doing so in line with the policies and procedures that we set out. because, as members have also said, it is us who carry the can for this, ultimately. It is us who have received the very very reasonable expressions of disappointment and outrage from the public. And it is therefore, in my view, up to us as members to be satisfied that officers of this council, when they are exercising delegated authority, are doing it in the way that they should be. And I believe that is fundamental. It is not an operational matter. It is a question of us being satisfied that this council operates along the lines that we have set out in the policies that we agree at committees, the standing orders that we agree at full council, the anti-fraud and corruption policy that we took through Policy and Resources Committee, and all of those other items that we have to make decisions on. Fundamentally, it comes back to, I believe, that basic point that I believe now that we have to be assured as members that officers, when they are exercising delegated authority, are indeed doing it in line with those policies and procedures we've set out. I think that is the first point and the first step towards rebuilding a sound working relationship between members and officers. And it is also the first step, I believe, in ensuring that the culture of this council is the one that we actually want to achieve. I'll go back to the first conversation I had with the Chief Executive after he was appointed, and he asked me what sort of council I would like Dumfries and Galloway to be. And my answer was very simple. And it was in the context of everything that was happening at that time, and members here who are present will remember it. I said that I wanted Dumfries and Galloway Council to be respectable. Let's start there.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Leader. I've been listening with interest here all the way through, and I think the first comment I have to make is that I need to, I think everyone else, thank Richard. He explained to me when I asked him about progress quite early on in the process. It was like peeling an onion. Right? What we didn't know at that stage, it wasn't a shallot, it was a bloody Kelsey onion, which is a massive big onion. And as each layer has been stripped off and stripped off and stripped off, more and more has become apparent. So what I'm getting really is this thing about the compliance thing again. Now, if we use the example of this in the procurement documentation are there. Now, what I don't understand is that why do compliance documents not get attached to every single, particularly now we're digital, not get attached to every single council report? So all the documents that officers fill in to ensure through the process that they've followed the proper processes, everything else, the proper consultations with the joint trade unions, for example, right? Now, especially because it's digital, could be attached to the report. The caveat, of course, is that if it strays into the confidential area or commercially sensitive, we might have to do something a bit different. But until we, as 43 members, actually get sight of the documents that officers are routinely filling in, because that's the process that they go through, then we have always got a concern. And a bland statement saying like the head of finance has been and the head of procurement has been consulted and is happy with the content of this report, that needs to change. And that's what I'm saying, is that is the where we would get assurance if the documentation that they have gone through is actually attached to the report so we can see it. Let's be visible what we do, not invisible.
Councillor Scobie.
Just in reference to Sean raising my name, not any difficult with that. But if he looks at the motion that's before us, what it says is in 2.3, note the concurrent improvements, brackets paragraph 39 to 321, those brackets, and further inquiry work being undertaken, paragraph 322 and appendix 2. That's to note inquiries today, not to proceed, but to note. That's what this motion is reading. So in respect of does it continue, then that's why I'm not making the points that, and I'll maybe come in with a counter amendment once this is all finished. So the motion is saying to note these, not to continue with the inquiry as per has been carried out under 3.22. So I think the mover, the seconder of the motion, we need to look at what they're saying in there.
Councillor Hardman?
Thank you, Leader, and yes, thank you to Richard for bringing this report to us. It's a damning report. I think no one can say otherwise. I was looking through old committee papers, and I note that back in March, the 23rd of March 2018, the Enterprising Subcommittee met. Now, actually, it makes reference to the commercial plan that was presented to members, and I recall that commercial plan was in fact sent back as being not fit for purpose. Being one of the members on that committee, I recall that, yes, I certainly wasn't happy with the way that service was being done at that point. However, I'm looking at the Appendix 1 that's before us today, 3.10, it states in the final paragraph that the appointment of suppliers and subcontractors used for the delivery of the 4G contract failed to comply with the Council's procurement standing orders, which applied at that time. Now, going back to the report that was put forward for members on the 23rd of March 2018, 6.5 of the report before us actually stated in there that, quote unquote, we are currently working with our colleagues in the Council's procurement department to develop a framework contract covering several roads maintenance activities to ensure that we are working within the Council's procurement standing orders. I guess my question is really quite specific to Richard. Have you found evidence that this in fact was the case, or have you not been able to establish that fact? Because members were told that the procurement services were being discussed at that point. So I'm just actually trying to find where the truth lies within these reports, because certainly that statement was very clear and that's what was reported to members. However, the appendix appears to contradict that statement. So I'm just wondering if Richard could maybe give any information regarding that.
Thank you, Councillor Hagman, to you, Leader. And certainly a statement in terms of the report, which is specific to the appointment of suppliers and subcontractors at the start of the 4G contract, absolutely failed to comply with procurement standing orders at the time. Subsequent to that, and included within the detail of the report and the report to Enterprising Services Subcommittee and the operational updates in 2018, yes, there was evidence that the service was working with procurement to improve and enhance the processes and procedures in terms of procurement, and indeed that they were being followed within the department. So whilst it wasn't in place at the time, you know, in terms of compliance, certainly there was additional work being done after, but that was after the 4G contract had been awarded.
Thank you, Lydia. If I could just come back on the point, I mean, that is reassuring that you have found evidence that what members were being told back in March 18 is in fact evidence to be correct. However, the question remains at why, if we were aware of such losses at that point, why was it not reported back to members at that point? And that's a concern that I have at this point. Thank you.
I think it was reported back to members. Members were aware at 2018, Councillor Hagman, that we had made a loss. The reporting the trading account specifically mentioned is the scale of the loss. So in fact, the 2018 time is the very last, that March would be the last month of the contract. So members were aware of a loss. However, the loss was not material or significant, even though it was a loss. It was the growth from 2018 moving forward that this suddenly became the size. The reports that came to EEI committee that were scrutinised by members indicated that the overall write-off in relation to the contract would be about £500,000. which went to enterprising some and then to 2 meetings of EEI. And again, it was the growth from that position to the current position which has triggered the significant investigation that members instructed to undertake.
Councillor
I just wondered, Leader, if it was at the point, though, because of some of the questions and points that have been raised, there's many points as questions that maybe we should have an adjournment and maybe talk about the recommendations and the decisions that we'll take in order to drive this forward. I do think this is really the starting point for members' proper involvement, and ultimately the decision will reflect that, hopefully, as we go forward. So if we could, we'd have been keen to get that.
Yeah, the Councillor Wilson goes in, wants in. Have you got the copies available of your amendments?
I have. Yeah, Council, do you know? I didn't send it on. I'll get some copies.
Just particularly so people who are participating remotely can see it.
Digitally,
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what he's just said, and probably propose that, given the time of day is, that maybe another adjournment would be satisfactory.
The only problem with that is that the IJB is due to start at 2 o'clock.
Half an hour.
Oh, well, we could go for half. I just wanted to, Councillor Scobie had made a point earlier on about 2.3, and I just wanted to maybe sort of reaffirm what we're trying to achieve with these recommendations proposed by the administration. 2.3, as set out in the paper, notes that the contract that was agreed in 2012 and started 2012-2013 was taken, and that decision, however it was taken a very different council. Obviously, there's been many improvements, and even if you don't think there's improvements, they are changes. Somebody had mentioned the audit risk and scrutiny reviews, I might add, into procurement over the years, and of course a number of changes that have been made within the council anyway. One of those changes is in 2.4 that we have our Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee, which I can't remember anybody disagreeing to when we set that up about 12 months ago. And certainly that first recommendation is about actually making sure that although there's a body of work that's going to be done, that again we do know in 2.3, there's additional things that we think this council needs to do. First of all, carrying out that review into financial procedures and procurement standing orders, making sure that they are complied with, but actually if there is any changes that are required. 2.5, a root and branch review of the road service. I think, quite frankly, to me, that review needs to be about making sure that the budget that this council allocates to roads within Dumfries and Galloway fixes as many potholes and as many roads as possible for that budget that is set. Quite simply, that is what that review should be about, if I was to get it into a one-liner. 2.6 is saying that actually it was highlighted in the best value audit about not just how information is presented to councillors, but what information is being presented to councillors, and therefore we would actually make sure that very quickly was the matter of a report to the Review of Standing Orders Subcommittee. And finally, 2.7, which has been discussed, about the resource required to support the scrutiny function of councillors. Now, much of that will be for audit risk and scrutiny, but actually for all service committees and all committees of the council, all committees have a scrutiny role. And actually, I'm sure that we might find that as we go on, what we're agreeing to, if we were to agree it in 2.6 and 2.7, actually are quite closely linked and related, and will most probably actually sort of fall into each other in due course. So I hope that just helps members to sort of understand the spirit of these recommendations and exactly what the intention of the administration is behind them.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, and it seems we're at the point where we've got the motion before us. I would like to move an amendment that the matter be referred for external inquiry.
Second that, Chair.
Councillor Crothers.
I'll wait till we have a gentleman in regards to any particular proposals, but hopefully we've come to a negotiated agreement as we go forward, collectively as a council, taking into consideration this subject matter and how important it is. So I'll just talk very, very briefly to what I've shared, hopefully electronically now.
Point of order, Chair. I thought we'd agreed to an adjournment.
Yes, we have.
So Councillor Scobie's motion and the second motion would have to come after the adjournment, because we're currently adjourned.
An adjournment, point of order.
So we're adjourning in order to consider the amendment. And Councillor Scobie has proposed an amendment, which I think we may wish to consider.
And I'm just outlining my.
Not adjourned, Chair, not adjourned.
I don't think, I wouldn't agree with adjournment, but I'm just trying to outline, just so the wider council can hear what's being said. So I think there's an extra recommendation should be in there. That is that the Dumfries and Galloway Council accepts and acknowledges the inadequacies and failings within DG First and Enterprise and Services, I'll put in brackets, contract management and procurement in particular, whilst undertaking the roads contract with Transair from April 13 to 18. I think we have to do that, be upfront and back to the level of public criticism that we've had. In regards to your, I think it's 2.4, what I'd like to, so we'll have this discussion as when we adjourn, but I've got a review should be carried out by a procurement subcommittee of finance, procurement and transformation committee. Go back to the points making Councillor Wilson made earlier. The only thing I've been arguing for and not been getting for years is a procurement committee. Absolutely agree to finance, procurement, transformation. That was a stage forward towards getting a separate procurement committee. So that to look at whether it's waste, whether it's roads, whatever that particular piece of procurement or even contracts management, that would have to be worked out. So by agreeing that, if we do come at that point, we agree, we'd have to look at our committees, obviously, or finance, procurement, transformation. I think Councillor Nicholas and I have had this kind of conversation many times. It can actually set up a subcommittee, so we'd ask it to do that. At your recommendation, try to fulfill this with this root and branch review, so 2.5. Agree that a root and branch review is carried out by the Audit and Risk and Scrutiny Committee rather than communities as previously. Now I know you've changed that, but we ask that the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee take charge of that, and that's something we can certainly discuss during the meeting. So we're also being asked to agree in line with the best value audit report. We just ask for a short addition to that at the very end, and that is in early course, so that it doesn't go on forever, it doesn't go into long grass, but just in early course. We did have a question in regards to the recommendation and agree that to increase the resource required to support the scrutiny function of the council and elected members. Comes back to full council in July. The question was what methods will be used to engage with members in order to get a fuller understanding of what's actually required there. We did that as well. So maybe we can discuss that and come back to that after we adjourn and have a proper discussion.
Okay, well, now adjourn for half an hour.
Sorry, can I just make a comment? I absolutely fully accept the findings of the report and members of the public and I just caution that perhaps we need to consider that when we're talking about the service, there are hard-working members of staff out there on the roads. It's not them particularly talking about, so perhaps members will remember that the staff out there will feel as angry about the service as anybody else. So just to say, recognise that by accepting all the comments are about the internal control and management failings that have been identified within this. But actually, when we use the word service, that the staff can feel quite proud about their service and quite rightly some of them other done. So just perhaps members that considering your recommendations, perhaps the management rather than service or management of the service would perhaps try some reassurance to the frontline staff that it's actually that they're not included and quite rightly as they are.
The reason I used that language is because from memory it was Enterprise and Services Committee. So I'm only taking it from the, it wasn't directed at any particular staff at all, so it was the actual department.
Adjourn for half an hour. Now there's a facility for groups to meet electronically. I wish to consider the amendment.
Yeah, I've got that.
That was my point, my point of order. I don't. No. That's absolutely right. So we should have been discussing it now. I know. We can't discuss it because we didn't have it. That was my point of order.